and Amanda McIntyre, who will be our moderator for tonight. So a few housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded, so if you do not want to be seen, please turn off your camera and change your names. This is a space for compassion, so all views are welcome. Let us be respectful to everyone and remain focused on the community. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the panel. And as soon as it starts, we shall start recording. Before we move forward, I'd like to introduce our chairman of PrideTT, Rudolph Hanamji. He will give you a brief introduction into Pride and what we're doing this year. Rudy?
Thank you, Eva. I thought tonight I would just stay quiet, but I put on my hat for a little moment. Hello, everyone. Happy Pride. Just as Eva said, I'm so happy to see so many squares on this call. My screen is overflowing. I can't see everyone. And that just tells me how far we can reach each other, even in these times. And Maria took a little bit of my spiel. I wanted to thank her for introducing us to Wanelisa and thank Wanelisa. I know she won't tell you herself, but it's a very weird hour where she is right now. So she's up with us all night. But I'm so happy that she can join other powerful voices right here in Trinidad and Tobago, because that's what PrideTT really is about. It's about highlighting the positive contribution of LGBTQI persons to national development. And this, of course, is our third year. And we, as you can see, we have grown by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. This year, we played on the year 2020 to take Pride to the next level. So you will see our marketing says Pride 20/2.0. We want to leverage PrideTT in an election year to build mental, financial, and political empowerment. Hence our theme this year, Be Empowered by Our Pride. And it was important for us to focus on the community and really gather valuable data so that we could actually implement direct intervention initiatives. I have said elsewhere that protests, placards, parades, and parties have value, but we also need to get into our communities and help them directly. And that's why on Sunday, we actually launched with Brandy and the Trans Coalition, the Sasha Fierce Fund. For those of you who may not know, Sasha Fierce was brutally taken from us a couple years ago, and she was one of our leading trans activists and HIV activists. And we launched a fund with Trans Coalition to help with career development and skills enhancement for the trans community. So Brandy was very happy to be able to join with us to do that. And really, Pride version 2.0 aligns well with the restrictions for COVID, as we wanted to build out a robust online platform. And you will see that we are running a needs assessment survey, which will feed into an empowerment manifesto. And we're hoping that that manifesto will also include the needs of all other marginalized groups. And we are also launching, well, we have launched an LGBTQI business skills database, a job seekers platform, and actually an artist directory also. And I know Amanda will be happy for that one as one of our leading artists in the community. So ladies, gents, and non-binary folk, queer people, all allies, really happy to have you all on the call. Our sessions will all be recorded this month so that we can document our history, and we hope that you can participate tonight openly and freely, and that it leads us to empowerment. So with all of that being said, thank you very much, and back over to Eva and Amanda.
Thank you so much, Rudy.
Okay, Amanda.
You're on now. Thanks, Eva. And just before we go in, I want to extend thanks for the session to PrideTT in their third year. The first year that this month of celebrations was launched, this would have been in 2018. I immediately recognized how much the community craved exactly this, craved the sessions of talk about sexual health, reproductive rights, craved workshops, craved the hikes. It was just a great reception in the community for what PrideTT offered. And through the years, and even now, I could see just how much your service, your continued stewardship in the LGBTI community is important and necessary. And for that, I thank you. So with that, we're going now into the introduction. So let's start with our good friend who hasn't said anything yet for the night, Zelika Julian. Zelika, could you tell us something about the wonderful work that you have been doing with I Am One, and of course, a bit about yourself as well? So I don't know if Zelika is with us right now. So maybe we can move quickly to Sharon. Sharon, would you like to tell us about yourself and the work that you're doing?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Those of you all who don't know me, I'm Sharon Mottley. My work in activism actually started many, many, many years ago. So in HIV primarily. And in 2003, I moved back to Trinidad and started doing work within the LGBTQI community. In 2010, a group of same gender loving women came together and thought it was necessary to position ourselves at the table in terms of LGBTQ discussions in Trinidad, because we recognized that the table was primarily dominated by the G, and it was essential that we have a voice. And so we formed the Women's Caucus of Trinidad and Tobago, which was registered in 2012, and really to serve the needs of women who love women. And we used that terminology so that it encompassed and we did not exclude women, because there are women who do not subscribe to being lesbian, you know, so we got a term that we thought would encompass everybody. And most of you all of the older generation, and I mean the older generation is now like Amanda's age, I'm well old, but some of the younger generation would have known about the work of the Women's Caucus. And we would meet every month, the third Wednesday of every month, really to address issues raised by the women. So if we thought sexual health was an issue, we would get someone to come in and talk about sexual health. We talked about religion, all the concerns that really mattered to the woman was central to our discussions. It was also an opportunity to network. We also did lots of fun stuff. We launched a talent show called Stage. We did Pride Market, you know, really to build the economic capacity of LGBTQI, you know, income generation. We did a whole lot of stuff. In 2018, suffering from a little bit of burnout, maybe a lot of burnout, because this is hard work, and I think we'll get a bit into that discussion. I decided to remove myself a little bit from activism, and I literally moved to Washington, D.C., a place that I have no roots because I lived in New Jersey before. And it's been a very interesting, traumatic 2 years, finding myself, you know, getting a job, et cetera, and thought that, you know, I'd be cool without activism. And then Black Lives Matter happened. And, you know, I could put up my sign, and we broke all the COVID rules, me and my school friend from primary, we were friends from since high school. We were out there on Black Lives Matter Plaza doing what we needed to do. So that's a little bit about me. So that's my 2 cents. Let's move along.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, I want to add some more to that because before I started any work in activism, in my 20s, I knew you from seeing you on television at certain times. And so once I started doing any type of public work and I actually met you, one of the things I immediately realized was very important was just visibility. Just visibility, people being able to see other people and understand, yes, there are people who have experiences like mine who are living a life with certain amounts of realization that I could attain to as well. And apart from that, I have to say Sharon Mottley is one of the most compassionate people I've met in doing work in activism in Trinidad and Tobago. So off of that, I will ask now Brandy Rodriguez to introduce herself.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Brandy.
I am Brandy. For all who knows me, I'm a trans woman. I've been a trans woman for the last 22 years. I'm the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Transgender Coalition, and the principal objective is to really overcome, to bring outcomes and efforts to strengthen the community through partnership and mobilization, networking, education, and capacity development for key populations, not limited to psychosocial support and mental health, but sexual reproductive health and rights included, and also HIV. I've been doing a lot of work since 1999 in HIV because when I decided to do my transition, I lost a lot of friends to HIV, and at that time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what to say because I didn't have the experience. And due to the fact that I've lost all of these people, I said something has to be done. Something is not right. There's a lot of disconnection. And, and that made me who I am today. I've turned around the stigma and discrimination and everything in a really positive way to make sure that my voice is being heard. And I did good. I made a lot of connections with the Ministry of Health and FPAD and other NGOs locally to build support and understanding and education for trans women. And now my platform is not really only about trans women, it's about migrants, PLHIV, sex workers, and the LGBTI community. So I have grown from strength to strength and to understand how we could best support and what the community needs are and how we could best collaborate to make this effort. I am really glad to be here on this committee because it's not about Brandy, but it's about, I come as one, but I represent many, and the voices is going to be heard. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Brandy. I appreciate so much the work that you are doing, Brandy, because of course we understand as a queer community that we are a vulnerable demographic. And yet within this vulnerable demographic is the even more vulnerable demographic of trans persons, of non-binary persons, non-gender binary, non-gender conforming, and more vulnerable, especially in terms of the threats of violence and death, as we have seen happening worldwide at an almost, that's a pandemic in itself. So with what you are doing, Brandy, I truly appreciate that work. And of course, as we continue to say, in whatever ways in which we can support, we are here. So now we're moving on to Faith Ferdinandez to please introduce herself. Hello, Faith? Is Zalika back yet?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Zalika.
Sorry about earlier. My
So
internet was given a bit of trouble.
That's okay. So Zalika, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the work that you've been doing these past years?
Sure. I the executive director of IAM1, which is a gender and LGBTQIA rights organization. It was founded by Jason Jones, and we've been active like since then. It was incorporated in 2014. Some of the local and regional projects that we founded includes the Your Story Research Project, which is started as a regional project to collect data on the lived experience of LGBTQIA people, and it has since then been extended to participants in South America and Africa through the King Conference. The King Conference is also another of our project. Started as a local King show during Pride celebrations, and in 2019, last year, we hosted the first International King Conference and show, which is specifically designed for trans men and masculine presenting LBQ women. And from the show, we wanted a space to kind of like theorize ideas and discuss similarities and differences within our communities. And the King Conference came about. We did a regional one in 2017. 2017, we also did our second local King show. And then in 2019, we combined both. And we had participants from the Caribbean, Africa, and Trinidad and Tobago, and South America. We're working on like continuing that. It actually like started Pride last year, and we also were like pioneers in Trinidad and Tobago Pride through Trinidad and Tobago Pride Arts Festival, which we started in 2015. Consisted of like different components, activities over a month period, like plays, the King Show, spoken word, open night, art galleries, workshops, concerts, etc. So that is some of the work we do. We are also like a member of like the Commonwealth Equality Network. So we work on that. We do advocacy on an international level by partnering with other organizations across the Commonwealth. And we also work with many other regional organizations in the Caribbean as well. So that's it about IAM1, I think, for now. Oh, we actually working on a documentary for the King Conference, which will be released soon. So I'll be sure to like send it out to these chats or whatever, PrideTT. So if you guys continue following them, you'd like see stuff from it.
Thank you, Zelika. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Pride Arts Festival, because that was quite something in those years in which it was hosted. And
all right, Zion.
Especially the plays, I remember the art shows and the parties. So thank you so much, Zelika, for this work that you've been doing over the years. Faye, are you here yet? No? So Wanelisa Xaba, who was already introduced to us by Maria Nunes. But could you now, Wanelisa, tell us some more about yourself? We know that you're wonderful, amazing, and a great friend to have. So what else would you like us to know about yourself and about this work that you're doing?
Hi, everyone. Warm greetings from South Africa. My name is Wanelisa Xaba, and I am an activist in South Africa, and I've grown up in Cape Town. So yeah, I started activism at age 15 when I was still in high school, and I got involved a lot in children's rights work with orphaned and children, particularly Black children who, you know, were still struggling with, you know, the legacies of apartheid. I mean, as all of us as Black people, we were struggling with the legacies of colonialism and apartheid in South Africa. So I started doing that work when I was in high school. And when I was in university, I started engaging in activism at my university, the University of Cape Town, around racial justice and conversations around racism and transformation. And in 2015, we started a national movement where we basically were advocating for a decolonized, anti-capitalist university environment, education, curriculum, including having Black academics also who are decolonial teach in our universities. And we also advocated for free education for the poor and vulnerable in South Africa. And that kind of introduced my work in terms of like the LGBT community, because I was in community with the queer community who were also youth activists and who were also student activists. And you know, the nature of movements are really complicated, and so we found ourselves, you know, fighting for a decolonial education system and a free education system in South Africa. And basically what we were saying was there has been a big lie in which the South African government and the South African society has been spreading internationally. And that is that we are a rainbow nation, we are transformed, we are a socially united country, post-apartheid. And we're saying, no, this is bullshit. We're living in a colonial country which still has a colonial name, and which is still by and large controlled by white people. The economy is controlled by white people. Black people live on the outskirts of the city in basically like modern concentration camps, or they live in rural areas that are underdeveloped. And so we were just kind of trying to tie in the fact that in South Africa, the dominant narrative is that, you know, you are poor because you are uneducated, and you're uneducated because your parents were lazy, right? And so you get an education in order for you to free yourself and free your family. And we say, but if we can't afford an education, this means that you have scores and scores of generations of young Black South Africans who are still stuck in a cycle of like disempowerment and poverty under white supremacy and under colonialism, right? And of course, you know, because the nature of movements is that everything is happening at the same time, we've really found ourselves as queer people in the movement really marginalized, because we found very soon that the agenda of like cisgender heterosexual Black men was like at the forefront of the movement. And when we were trying to talk about issues of like how patriarchy, heteronormativity, cisnormativity affects Black students in the university space, because university spaces are colonial spaces, which means, you know, you are oppressed in terms of your race, sexuality, you know, your gender identity, etc., etc. It's not just about being Black. You found that like you have cisgender heterosexual male comrades who would say, you know, no, we'll fix that once we get the free education, etc., etc. So we found ourselves, and then you have straight people in the movement who are like, what is this gay agenda? Like, you know, you're dividing the Black community, etc. And then you also had rape culture in the movement. So, you know, it was an amazing movement. I can never take away the fact that this movement in South Africa really literally stopped the functioning of universities. We completely stopped the functioning of universities. In certain institutions, we were, you know, destroying colonial, you know, symbolisms and statues, and taking down statues. And so it was a really powerful decolonial moment in post-apartheid South Africa. but you know, we found ourselves really at the mercy of like the heterosexual black man, you know, a cisgender particularly. And so I kind of continued my work in terms of like LGBTI activism while I was still a student as well. So I documented hate crimes in South Africa against the LGBTIQA plus community here in South Africa, and kind of, you know, was really vocal around like homophobia and transphobia and queer antagonism in general in South Africa, and kind of just saying to Black people in South Africa, hey, you know, we cannot internalize Christian colonial norms, right? Like, we have been African people, and pre-colonial Africa was very gender fluid and sexually diverse and fluid and inclusive. And so what it means to decolonize the continent means that we acknowledge that that is part of our history, and that a lot of the penal codes that came onto the continent that were enforced were very much a Victorian Christian morals. And so to kind of just tie in decolonization and tie in, you know, the LGBTI struggle in South Africa was kind of one of the things that we were trying to kind of preach at the time. I've moved on to finish my master's, and I'm currently doing my PhD on decolonization and higher education in South Africa. That's what I'm working on. And, you know, I lecture on gender and sexuality part-time. I lecture on Black feminism, decolonization, and just really just to be able to, even in public, in social media, to move the discourse further away from, you know, just only we're Black, we're oppressed, but we're Black, we're queer, we're oppressed, we're Black, we're differently abled, we're oppressed, we're Black, we're differently abled, we're queer, you know, etc., etc., and all of our intersectional identities, right? And tied into how they're policed and punished under a colonial state, and a colonial state that is policed and administrated by Black government and Black bodies, and what that means for Black people on the ground. I can go on and on and on, but I'm going to stop. I think that just kind of gives it an overview, and we can engage later on, and if there are any particular questions.
Thank you so much, Wanelisa. Very interesting discussion there on racial justice and the socioeconomic factors related to it. And what you close off by saying takes us into our discussion. Audre Lorde famously said, we are not single issue people. So in terms of the intersection, and I'm going to Sharon Mottley first with this, in terms of the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality, could you speak about your life within this intersection?
So I think when I recognized that there was intersectionality, because this discussion on intersectionality is more recent than we cared to imagine. When we started work with HIV, and my HIV work started in the late 90s here in the United States, looking at within the African American community, who at the time and still currently are disproportionately affected not only by HIV, but by most other chronic illnesses. What I realized was there was increased vulnerability within socioeconomic factors, right? And all the work that needed to happen to get funding, to get interventions within those communities. Fast forward to coming back to the Caribbean in the early 2000s, where we think in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider the Caribbean, that we don't have some of those issues. That, you know, oh, the African American experience is something that is so separate and apart from what we experience in the region. Because, you know, when we really look at it, the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, as a country within the Caribbean, we're really a Black nation. No matter how you want to look at gradations of color, how you want to look at ethnicities, we are all people of color. What we recognize, though, is that, as you said earlier, classism plays a huge role. You know, it is how far removed we can take ourselves from our Blackness. So if you were born in a certain part of Trinidad and you moved up in society, you know, went to good schools or whatever, good schools you hear me, or your parents made sure they put cream in their coffee to lighten your complexion, you know, you hear Trinidadians will talk, I is mixed. When you know, nobody claims their Blackness. They say, I am Black, however, my granny, my this, and my this. And we look down at people who are darker skinned. So it's almost like if you are of a darker hue, to get to certain levels in our country, you have to move away from your Blackness, move away from your socioeconomic status. And that ties into even our LGBTQ community, which those of us who've worked in it recognize quite nicely. You know, I always talk about the people who could afford to be gay abroad. We have a whole clique of people who could afford to be gay abroad, you know, and don't see or recognize the needs of members of our community who are really in peril and vulnerable, and what that vulnerability looks like, you know, because we try to create that shield, you know. And so I always, you can't talk about one without talking about the other. You can't talk about HIV vulnerability without talking about socioeconomic, without talking about racial, without talking about classism. And if we want to truly address any of the isms, we have to address all the isms. We can't talk about racial parity and not talk about homosexuality and homophobia and, you know, and all these other things, and socioeconomic vulnerability. It's bullshit. I promise I was not going to use, I'm not, you know what I mean? So we have to really keep it real, and we have to own, we all have to own our biases, which we all have, you know? And I always say, us educated haves, because you have, whether you have an education, whether it's a good job, you know, and what are the responsibilities of the haves to the have-nots? I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not talking too loud.
It does. It does. It does. And I want to move immediately from what you're saying to ask Brandy the same question. Brandy, can you tell us about your experience living within the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality?
Right. Well, I would say, firstly, as a Black trans woman, the oppression across the floor, it does not make a difference. Being trans, there's oppression with being trans. Being Black, there's still oppression. There's no intersectionality where that is concerned. And I think more so, the respect that the trans women receive in the LGBTI community, our own, is if we get in it right in we own community, this connection is right here. What would you expect for society to give trans women? Because our values, and for being a trans woman, and the courage, the support, you know, all that is supposed to be, you know, it's not there. And it's even worse when you're Black. It's even worse when you're Black and you don't fit in, or because I have a lot of trans people who want to do what I do in terms of being visible, but packaging, there in terms, Brandy, I am not like you. I can't fit in because I don't package, my packaging is not completed. And these are the conversations we have to be, you know, talking about. And I want more support from the LGBTI community for trans women, because most of this visibility and all of this, because the gay man could pass with all their privileges, lesbian has been passing with all the privileges. Who knows who is bisexual? Nobody knows. But trans women are always going to be victimized. And you're being victimized when you're Black, when you're trans, when you don't have education, when you didn't come from a good school because you get through out since 10. So what is it? You have to do sex work. So what is it that where is the intersectionality and the biases? All are there across the floor. So this is what I am bringing to the table.
You're muted. You're muted. You are muted.
Thanks, Sharon. I realized, sorry. Yes, just a reminder to everyone on the call, when someone else is speaking, if you could turn off your mic so that their presentation comes through much clearly to the rest of us, but at the same time, you have to remember to turn on when you come back to talk again. That being said, thank you so much, Brandy, for that contribution. It reminded me of some issues in the community with regards to the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality. And perhaps Sharon or Wanelisa could weigh in on this for me, and that is cisgender privilege. Do you find, as a queer woman, that you are privileged in terms of your sexuality being received by wider society? And how do you deal with your privilege within the queer community in terms of being distinguished from trans women?
Wanelisa, do you want to go?
I don't mind. I don't mind.
Go next, yeah.
Just because I also really feel really passionate about this. You know, I think this is a good question, because I actually even come from a community or a society of Black women who at some point considered being called cisgender an oppression. And I was like, no, friends. But you know, and I think this is why I feel really strongly about decolonization, because when you come from a decolonial perspective, you are unable to bypass your own implications within the nexus of oppression, so to speak, right? And so, I mean, as a Black woman, from the township, as a Black woman who is depressed, as a Black woman who experiences various levels of like marginalization, you know, it's difficult to tell another Black person who embodies exactly my struggle that, hey, you are privileged in certain ways and in certain ways, you know, and for me, the only way in which I can explain this to another person is to say, hey, we're all to various degrees implicated in certain areas, and that's the way in which, you know, white supremacy and coloniality is fucked up is that it implicates us and our bodies, is so that we are in a hierarchy where we oppress other people. And so, of course, as a cisgender person, a person who is very comfortable within cisgenderedness and who reaps the reward of walking down the road and not having anyone question my gender or want to punish me for regressing outside of what is considered the norm, or even killing me for, or even believing my gender, I walk with immense privilege. And in certain ways, I embody that oppression that a lot of non-binary people and a lot of trans people in our community experience. And I think that's something that we really, really need to be always cognizant of. And I think for myself, I refuse to be in panels that, for example, on Women's Day, International Women's Day, where there's no representation from other people who are not cisgender, because I think those are the little things in which they are in my sphere of control to say, hey, I've noticed you've invited me for a panel on Women's Day, but I don't see trans women, I don't see sex workers, I don't see these identities. And so, like, which women are we talking about? Because if we need to be honest and say we're having a panel on Women's Day for cisgender women, and be honest about that, and not to say we're having a panel on Women's Day for women who are marginalized, because that's not true. Like, if there are no people who are organizing, who are speaking, who are voicing out the issues of, like, women who are sex workers, women who live with physical disability, women who are trans, women who have physical disability, women who are depressed, etc., etc., etc. And so, I mean, to be very explicit in that is to say, yes, absolutely, to be a cisgender Black woman, I have to constantly deal with the fact that I navigate the world in I don't navigate it with ease, because in South Africa we have really high levels of, like, gender-based violence where women, and I'm sure, I mean, across the world, this is a phenomenon where, like, we are killed in such astonishing numbers, like, all the time, every time, even during the pandemic, women and children are being killed all the time. But we need to also be very honest that when you understand gender and how gender is constituted in a colonial society under white supremacy, you have to understand that gender binaries, that is part of a colonial construct. And so if you are in that colonial construct and you operate as a cisgender person, you have a particular kind of privilege. I have an ID. I know trans sisters in my community who don't have IDs, who can't get documentation, and who therefore can't attend university, can't get jobs, etc., etc. So the spiral is also very structural. It's not even an ideological thing about coloniality, but it's very, very practical things. Like, someone can't go to an airport without their gender being in question. And so that is the privilege that I live in. And so and that is the constant conversation we need to constantly have. And when we are cisgender queer women in our movements, especially in these so-called women-only spaces, we need to constantly be pushing back against, like, very powerful, influential, transphobic figures, like people like Chimamanda Adichie, who was a huge influencer in feminism, or liberal feminism rather, but it is a huge influence in the world, but still propagates, like, transphobia. And so it is an onus on us to take that responsibility and to take that fight, and not to expect for trans women to be constantly putting their bodies on the line in transphobic and, like, trans antagonistic women-only spaces, feminist spaces, that's also sex worker exclusive, you know, etc., etc. So I mean, I hope I'm making a bit of sense, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Amanda. Are you hearing me?
Go ahead.
Amanda, your mic is muted.
It's still muted. It's still muted.
It's still muted.
I'm going to be
Okay, there
much
we go.
more vigilant with this. Thank you, Kennedy. And Wanelisa, I was saying in the dead of silence just now, I like that you raised the point about Chimamanda, who ironically wrote The Danger of a Single Story, but yet in terms of her politics towards trans women, she returns to the single story of interpreting woman and womanhood purely on the grounds of the physical. And also the point about being invited to panels, etc., and not seeing trans women, which brings me to a really tricky point in terms of advocacy, and that is the phenomena of the TERF, the trans exclusive radical feminists, persons who are invested in work and advocacy for women's rights, but their work and advocacy for women's rights does not recognize trans women. So Brandy, this question is for you. Could you tell us about any experiences that you may have had and that you are willing to share about this, the trans exclusive radical feminists who do not include trans women within the purview of their advocacy?
First, Amanda, I would want to see the foundation is that femininity is still not valued, and there's still so many disconnections and lack of educations and sensitization in these spaces, because today I was asked a question like that. Is there any, by a CEO of a company, is there any way, as we were talking about what they could do in terms of hiring a trans woman? What policy is in place, and what could we do? And to be honest with you, I still have to figure out where we are with this and how far we could go. I know we want to move as a region in Trinidad and Tobago. We have UC Trans for the English-speaking Caribbean to support this mechanism, because we are working closely with Red Light Trans, who is the leaders for trans persons, the Hispanic people map already built for the Latin American countries who are way advanced compared to us. And I honestly want to collaborate more with users and putting together something, because this is the where that we're supposed to be when we want to put, policies in place and put documents in place to support trans women, please. That is something that we need to do at this moment. And shifting, and to also shift the culture around people's thinking and mentality.
Thank you so much. Exactly. And that is what we hope to do as a community. And I'm absolutely certain in terms of their vision, mission, core values, PrideTT is invested in that as well. So before we move on from this topic, I just want to weigh in from Zelika. So Zelika, could you tell us about your experience in the intersection, your lived experience in the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality?
Well, to be honest, that has been like the lived experience of my entire life, and I would probably like add in like class there too. race, class, gender, and sexuality.
Exactly. Thank you.
I born and grew up in a very like marginalized community in Trinidad. And you know, I saw a lot of injustices to women, both within my family and like other women within my communities, from a very young and like fragile age. I would say like that is where my advocacy stems from. Um, and for me particularly, coming into the LGBTQIA community in Trinidad and Tobago, it was a very interesting experience. Yeah, I mean, I'm also from South Trinidad too. And like as a Southie come to town, like when I started university, it was like a difficult space to navigate like the queer settings. And eventually, like when I started doing some like gender courses and stuff in UV and like meeting people like Stephanie and such from my GDS, then it started, but it was still like being in the community now, presently today, it seems like if, okay, like everybody know everybody, but like being and trying to infiltrate it in those days, especially with nothing in common, because the LGBT community, like most activist spaces in Trinidad, is mostly made up of middle class people with time, right? Which I don't really have much in common with, except like in terms of like university degree or whatever. But like it was always like difficult to like navigate that space. And like for me, being Black, being ghetto, being masculine presenting lesbian woman or queer woman, I didn't really like see, although like, okay, I was like dating somebody in the community who was like known in the community. So, you know, I'm going to things, going to events, but I didn't really see anything for me particularly. I didn't really see anything for a Black ghetto masculine presenting woman. And that has been like my drive with I Am One in terms of like creating, like gathering information and research and like creating spaces for those experiences. I think like even within activist spaces, we need to be like careful in terms of being inclusive. Because this is the same Trinidad where, you know, a couple years ago, T Mc had to resign for statements that he made with regards to Asami. Am I saying her name properly? Asami, the Japanese Spanish who was murdered in
Narukia.
Right, who was murdered in Trinidad.
Yes.
It's the same Trinidad, not saying not an excuse for her murder or anything, but it's the same Trinidad where he resigned for her murder, but many Black women and girls dying every year, and you know, so like the activist space always have to be like careful in terms of including like that race and class thing, because things always get diluted in terms of like okay, like for example, the public conversations you would be hearing about the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in Trinidad pre the police killings and post the police killings today. You know, like the public commentary. So there's always this class influence and how the public like sees people from like different spaces.
Yes.
And like today I was very like heartbroken upon hearing of Onella Greaves' murder. Well, yeah, I call it a murder today. And it reminded me of what happened 50 years ago in Trinidad during the 1970s Black Power Revolution with Beverly Jones, who was 16 or 17 and pregnant in the hills, fighting for freedom. And 60 years later, where we are. And for me personally, like, I mean, like Brandy, I spoke to you about this as well too. I think that the LGBT community needs to work with other communities, especially poor marginalized communities, because there's so many queer people in ghetto communities. Like in my community, like people will find like, okay, as a queer person walking through a bad boy community or a poorer community, you're more subject to discrimination. In my community, nobody will disrespect me. It's when I go to the bank, and when I go to the government offices, and when I go in the big boy spaces, is where I just experience discrimination. When I'm applying for jobs, is where I experience discrimination. In my communities, I get the full respect, 100. So my thing on that is that as the LGBT community, yes, we had to focus and figure out we're going to be community at the beginning, but now is the time to work with other communities, because you will hardly see a LGBT activist stopping on Charlotte Street to hail the lesbian who does be selling the cassava and yam and say, hey, we having an event, come and talk on a panel, or come out to this event. You understand? It will be the same 20 people they're seeing all the time. So how we could really infiltrate and work in different communities and share the resources, because there's so many LGBT youths who are not into this kind of activism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who wouldn't, they wouldn't reach. And you, like how I would see the million Facebook posts about the million events happening now. 5 years ago, I would not know nothing. Once you don't know and once you're not inside, you would never, it's difficult. So how we, for that, my thing is how we reaching those people and also not alienating non-queer people who not queer, but also like the queer community had this kind of way of saying, okay, the black people, let's discriminate against the black queer brothers and sisters, black ghetto people. But how now we could educate, because we know for a fact, right, that homophobia is the thing that was colonial, not homosexuality, right? We know that, but how we could, you know, like educate and communicate, because I just do it on my own little groups and chat with people in my communities, you understand? But we had to figure out like how to not make us look like if we is one of the group of people who don't really care nothing about, you know, poor people. Like when I identify first as a woman, second as a poor woman from a marginalized community, ensuring that and my queerness come to that. Because this is where I grow, this is where I come from, this is the people who I turn to. People from my community and my family would help me plan events for Pride when we used to do Pride as festival. You know what I mean? So like it's how we could do those kind of things on this small level, but also on a bigger level. That is why we'll touch on that for now.
Thank you so much, Zelika, for that intense and in-depth contribution that really spoke to serious problems within the queer community, and that is how the queer community internalizes other oppressions. Classism is a big problem. We know that. One of the points I made during the time of the Jones judgments was just the observation of the crowds that gathered in front of Parliament and then in front of the Hall of Justice, and was largely just crowds of people that we knew, people from Woodbrook and environs. And it made me ask the question of exactly who is involved in advocacy, who is allowed to be visible in their involvement in advocacy, and to what extent is their outreach outside of urban centers into non-urban centers and into rural areas in terms of queer advocacy, and always coming back to the question of exactly who is this work for? What is this work for? Which takes us into the next topic, and that is, what are some of those negative aspects of activism and public life that you would like to see addressed? So for this one, I'm going right back now to Sharon Mottley, because I mean,
I was just about to tell you, Sharon had her hand up, so I guess she has something to say, but because you're getting to her.
Yes, I'm going back to Sharon now, so Sharon could speak to this topic.
Okay, so a lot was covered by many people in those previous discussions. And I think it's important to say that activism shows up in different ways. There are those who are on the front lines, and then those who cannot afford to be on the front lines. And I will tell you, and we know why they cannot afford to be on the front lines. Because our most vulnerable may not be in a position to take the risk of that kind of exposure. And when we talk about this notion of activism, I tell people activism isn't something you get up one morning and just say you're doing, or some people do. But for me, activism is something that starts with a feeling in your belly, when something not feeling right. And that feeling doesn't come from just one thing. So it is like you're feeling weird about how people are treated badly in general. Because that's how it started for me, seeing how other people were treating people in my high school because they came from a lower socioeconomic group. And that, of course, then spiraled into HIV work and realized that, you know, people were being stigmatized, discriminated against, and marginalized just because they were infected with a disease, right? And then you come back now, and in America, I say you saw the intersectionality quite clear. Forget it. If you're poor, you're Black, you have HIV, and you're gay, you might as well just wrap it up and be dead back in the 90s, you know? And Trinidad is the same, it's the same kind of environment sometimes. And I tell people, what privilege allows us to do is that to whom much is given, much is expected. That I tell people as my mantra. I got involved with sex workers, trans, HIV, because somebody had to say and do something. And if we waiting for the next person, you know, like I always say, the thing with homosexuality is that for most Trinidadians, they have a notion of who we are. They have a notion of what a Zami look like and what a Bulla looks like. And what those of us who are privileged enough or just real dotish, you have to put a face to that shit. You have to go and say, you know what? You want to see what a fucking lesbian looks like? This is what it looks like. She is a mother. She pays taxes, you know? And while we do that work on that level, creating safe spaces for those who cannot. And Zelika is talking about the poor Black. Just before I left Trinidad, I was approached by young schoolgirls who were saying, Auntie, yes, Auntie, I believe I'm a lesbian. And the one thing you will hear about most people in their coming out stage is that they feel they're the only one. I have met, you said it, that you're the only lesbian in the whole of Trinidad, or, you know, and the importance of trying to create spaces, because when they said, can we call you? I also was in that dilemma because of where I am. And when you're dealing with a group of people, and we're talking about below 15 years, who are exploring their sexuality, and what does that mean? And so I believe that education is key, and we owe it. We owe it to regular Trinidadians who don't have a notion of cisgender. You know, they'll say, what? Who don't have a notion of any of this, that we as learned LGBTQI people, we know all the language and the nuances. How do we package that in a way? Because my objective always has been is to bring many of the people who sit in the middle of the road. Because I tell people you have extremes, you have people we will never be able to change their mindset, but they are a small percentage. The vast majority of people who are waiting to be educated, and how do we educate those people, bring them to our side, you know, as well as try to address the needs of our community. And I'll say one last thing. Don't forget, I always tell people, what we see in the LGBTQI community in Trinidad and Tobago is a microcosm of what exists in larger Trinidad and Tobago. All the bacchanal, the gays, so they like bacchanal and confusion. It is a microcosm. The same things that affect us are the same things that affect wider Trinidad and Tobago. So we can't really divorce it. So we have to look at how we have to change the whole thing, you know? So I will shut up again.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Ooh, that was really a lot. I feel like we are about to publish a journal once this is transcribed. But as you were talking, my mind kept going back to what Zelika said before. And it reminded me of a lecture I saw from Toni Morrison. Because Sharon, what you are describing is still life at the center. And Toni Morrison said that in terms of her experience as a writer, she stood on the periphery. And I'm understanding Zelika's position as from rural Trinidad and from a socioeconomic background that was not privileged, as a person who stood on the periphery. And Toni Morrison said she stood on the periphery and she spoke with such a clear, distinct voice that she shifted the conversation away from the center. And so as we continue to talk about the negative aspects of activism and public life that we've experienced and how that relates to the work we're doing now, I'm going to ask the same question to Wanelisa.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so this is a very hectic area for me, and quite a sensitive area, because I have moved a little bit backward in terms of being on the front lines because of, you know, what it means to be an activist in South Africa and what it means to be visible and to be vocal, and the different levels of danger that people experience and face when they are associated with particular movements or they speak up, etc., etc. So it's a very convoluted one for me. However, I'm going to boil it down to two things. I'm going to speak from my own context because, I mean, that's the only context that I know very well. And I will say that as Black people in South Africa, we are obsessed with icons, and we are obsessed with the one person that or the one or two people that we identify as founders or voices of movements, right? And most of the time, queer people, and most of the time, Black women and Black women from the townships, rural areas, do the labor for these movements, and most of the time, the only people that history remembers is if it is in a general Black context, it will be cisgender, you know, heterosexual Black men, right? And then if it's in particular, you know, LGBT spaces, I find that it's mostly like cisgender gay men, right? Or if it's Black feminist spaces, it is Black feminists who speak a particular kind of way that white people can understand, and speak a particular kind of English that white people can understand, and who have gone to university. And so, you know, I'm at a very weird position in which I live in the township, in the poorest areas in South Africa, and at the same time I've attended like one of the best universities on the continent, but at the same, and I speak like this, and etc., etc. you know, but at the same time, like my economic circumstances, like I still have to worry about bread, right? But I navigate in different spaces. So I really relate, because I feel like when we're talking about Black feminist spaces, classism, and when sometimes we talk about LGBT spaces, sometimes classism is a huge issue, like economics are a huge issue, and who gets to speak, etc., and who gets to be the ones who brings the ideas, and who are the people who put their lives on the front lines, and put their lives in danger for who, so that history remembers who, right? So those are the convoluted things, and I think it boils down, in my context, to we are obsessed with icons and recognizing that person who, you know, will be the person who is the face of the movement, who will be credited with the labor that like poor people in the poor communities have been doing, with poor Black women have been saying this shit for centuries, right? Then one Black woman has a university degree and who like speaks nicely and white people can hear, like becomes like the face of it all and erase like communities and a wealth of knowledge that that exists in these communities and these movements, right? But at the same time, I also think that my experience in movements is that you have a lot of people who are battling structural violence, interpersonal violence, intergenerational violence, inherited violence, etc., and we are not prioritizing, like Sharon was talking about self-care earlier on, and taking a step back. We're not prioritizing working through trauma, and so we get into like activist spaces and we trigger each other, 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 and it becomes like this explosive space, where I feel sometimes, you know, I'm doing this work for 2 years. I've completely just been like, okay, on the ground, I am not doing particular kinds of work because, you know, I realized that I have been really scarred in particular ways, and so it makes me a real unsafe space to be in movements. And that's a very difficult but an honest conversation that I think we need to have with ourselves, because sometimes we're just not safe to be in movements because we're hurting so much that one person triggers us in a meeting and we completely like just burn down the whole thing. And so now, you know, we're not going to be able to move with what we needed to move with because one person has been, you know, hurt, and so they have been vindictive, and now and so we have factions, and it's just like, no, like let's just heal, like we're hurting, and we need to prioritize like dealing with trauma in our movements so that we can be able to really organize in ways that prioritize Black love, care, you know, they call it the feminist ethics of care. I haven't seen it in feminist spaces, but apparently they talk about it a lot because it's very violent spaces. But they talk about it. But I mean, so I think like the ways in which, and I recognize this because I have been very destructive in movements. One Black man will say one rape culture thing, and the whole thing will shut down because it's triggered, you know, my violence. Like this shit, you know, and we're not honest about these things. It's like, okay, well, Wanelisa, you're triggered. You've experienced sexual violence. One Black man, one cisgender heterosexual Black man has said one fucked up thing, and so the whole movement has to shut down. But like, it's like they're having that self-awareness of, oh, this is my trigger point, and so how do I show up in the room that doesn't escalate the Black on Black violence, right? I think that's a huge, and it's sensitive because our pain is personal, you know, but our pain is also political, and, you know, and our pain has been policed for so long that when one person says something, oh my, you know what I mean? And so I think that we need to be very careful about that. But I also think that we have just a quick thing. We sometimes when we have these icons, these people who are hyper visible, we put certain people in huge amounts of danger. And so for me, one of the reasons why I took a step back was because it wasn't because I was receiving death threats from like various amounts of like white men who were saying things like, you know, once I get a hold of you, your family will not be able to like recognize your body, you know, to having like black men who were like political activists saying, you know, all you need is a dick, like, you know, you're clearly not getting any dick and you really need a dick, and all of this nonsense about feminism will be sorted, you'll be like sharp, you know. And so all of those things what had happened, and I'd internalized that violence and I hadn't worked through it. But it was only when there was someone in the movement who had orchestrated a very, very violent situation that I said, hey, I've been willing to put myself in danger. We're like, we know white people are fucking evil as, they're evil as fuck. Like, you know, like white supremacy is evil structurally, but white people, when they need to defend white supremacy, they can go to a very extreme lengths, right? And so I was willing to put myself in danger where I was getting inboxes continuously from white men who were planning like my death in public. But it only took me when there was another person who is a well-known activist who orchestrated something really I thought was very premeditated and evil that I said, no, actually, I have been experiencing a lot of impact, and I need to, it's 2018, I need to move up, I need to get away from all of this because this is an unsafe space, right? And so I think as activists, we really need to have really honest conversations with ourselves about how we deal when the impact happens. How do we deal with that trauma? And sometimes it implodes within our movements because we're not willing to do that difficult work of saying, you know what, it's tough, and I'm hurt, but you know, I can take this somewhere and I can heal this, and I can take it somewhere and come back when I'm a little bit better because I'm not a safe space at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Wanelisa. You're absolutely right. And we have to continually seek, you know, just as fellow activists, as each other's keeper, we have to continually seek these safe spaces, such as this one, in which we can have these very honest and meaningful conversations. So now I'm taking the same question over to Brandy. Brandy, could you talk to the topic of the negative aspects of activism that you may have experienced and that you would like to share, negative aspects of activism and public life, please?
Negative visibility is, visibility comes in two parts. Visibility comes for positive, and visibility could turn around and bite you in the ass, that you know the backlash. And is it you, when you're doing this good, it's for you're representing a community, and the negative impacts in so many different ways. You're being the violence, you're being the abuse, and from time to time you always see it, because it is not just, it's not just that being that visible for this cause, but you have to fight. Mm-hmm. We're fighting for this. We're talking about human rights on this hand, and then you're talking about the violations and the abuse and all of the other negatives with this on the other hand. So I think what we need is better representation, so we could understand. We need trans women in different spaces, sitting on different boards. We need trans women in parliament. We need trans women in every space, and because it would bring support. Because when the visibility is good, yes, but on the other hand, the negative is so much because the balance is not going to decrease. Because sometimes, even with the news reporting, they would ask you a question, and the way how it would be documented in the media, the reading, the information shared would be so much different. So I think we need to see a lot more better representation, and get more trans women in certain spaces so that the conversation could be understand what visibility is and understand the negatives and the positives about visibility. We need more of that.
Absolutely. Representation matters. You know, I didn't think about it in that way before, Brandy, and I'm glad that you brought it to me, the distinction between negative visibility and positive visibility. And it immediately took me back to the ways in which the news reports ran after the murder of Sasha Fierce. You know, just so much public questioning concerning sexuality and presentation,
Yeah,
right?
because they did not talk about non-gender conforming or the non-binary, the drag queen, sex worker. It's everything that not being trans and not being human.
Yes.
And these are the things that I think that lacks. And
Yes.
for trans women, from time to time, you find the conversation is so much. You're doing all of this, but you have to be, you just have, is one little thing to make this go really bad. One person word, one this, one that. And I would like to see a Black trans woman like myself 20 years from now in the history books as an activist fighting for human rights. We may never see that. You might see a white trans woman somewhere come, or a cisgender woman doing this, or RuPaul doing this. RuPaul are not trans. They put these things in your brain to make you think this is trans. No, it's not.
Yeah.
And the education is not there. The education is not there. We need to figure out how to get these things out there. Representation is
Thank you.
Jump in because I want to jump in here, and I really what I'm hearing, Brandy, is we need to humanize people. We have gotten stuck with these things called labels. So everybody must fit into a nice little label, but at the core of it, how do we see a trans person as a human being? You know what I mean? And I think, Wanelisa, one of the things that was critical to me was beginning to shed some of those labels. Like one that went earlier clock was the whole label of feminist. I remember we had a chat many years ago with Gabby Hossain, and she said, how many feminists in the room? And about 5 people of 40 something put up their hands, and I didn't. And I said it was really because the feminist movement in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago did not encompass women who eat vaginas. We were nowhere present, But when it comes to support and solidarity, you want to group women. So feminism had to group. And when you talk about things like gender-based violence, we can't even talk about Black queer femme, and not talk about sexual violence that impacts all women in Trinidad and Tobago at a level that is, it is unbelievable. All the unreported cases of sexual violence, and then the added vulnerability of being non-gender conforming in that whole realm. But it's because people don't see us as human. We are fucking freaks, and it is easier to harm a freak than it is to harm, you know, my wife or whatever. But it's how do we begin to get people to humanize us? And I wanted to just say, when we talk about the negative aspects of activism and public life, for me particularly, it was really being in spaces that I felt that I had to be negotiator, trying to always calm those fractions, because they'd have, you know, and I did my empathy training, and I would try to balance the shit, realizing that you just really want people to fucking get off their egos. What are we here to do? We are here to, what is the end goal? Okay, we have lots of egos, but what are the end goal? And yes, my hurt is my hurt, but sometimes we have to look at the bigger picture. What are we trying to accomplish? And then for me, it was when it just got too fucking tired. I got fucking tired and I had to leave because, and like I tell people, right now I am living in this space in my head. I am nothing. I am not a sexual being. I can't tell you. I'm not a sexual being. I don't have a label. I'm not anything. I'm not an activist. I'm not a feminist. I'm not anything. And that's just from the fucking frustration, because you think, you see it so clearly here. You feel it so clearly here. You want to do it so clearly there. But it's just so fucking hard. It is so hard internally, to have to fight internally as well as to have to deal with the external.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If I can just, I mean, to just really reiterate, Sharon, one of the things that I, you know, as someone who, you know, really tries to be self-reflective, as a cisgender person who tries to be self-reflective, one of the things that I've noticed and I always want to talk about is the objectification of like trans people in feminist movements and in like LGBT spaces in my context. And I mean, when I say objectification, I mean that it's really nice to have banners that say we're trans inclusive, etc., and to kind of look at intersectionality as like a rainbow nation at all. Everyone is included. Look, we even have these freaks, right? As you're saying, Sharon. And I think, and what people don't do is, we don't, as cisgender people, and I have to say, we as cisgender people, you know, we just want to have that label when we haven't really engaged with people's humanity and engaged with what a community deeply needs. But we want to have a feminism that is deemed inclusive. And so an example is, there was a very gruesome murder which made like the international realms, that happened last year in South Africa, of a university student who was killed at a post office by a government worker and was raped and killed and like just in a very gruesome way. And you know, there was like a national movement of women all over who wanted to shut the country down. And basically it was saying, you know, it's an inclusive Black feminist intersectional space, trans inclusive, etc. However, when it came down on a national level to have the valuable input around strategy of like trans women, people were told, no, they're dividing the movement, etc. They're bringing the politics, etc. People were saying, oh, we're inclusive of all of this and this, but like dead naming and really just like misgendering people, etc. And when, you know, you're trying to have that conversation, people are not really saying, hey, I'm so sorry, I fucked up, I made a mistake, how can I do this better, how I'm learning. It's like, oh no, I mean, there's a whole pandemic going on. I mean, I can't stop, not because of your pronouns or etc., etc., etc. And so these are the different ways in which we objectify people in so that our movement on the banner looks really nice and great, but actually when we actually in terms of like what the movement needs and how it can cater to people and to people's humanities and to people's struggles in real ways, we're not engaging because it's too convenient, which is the same kind of narrative that like Black cisgender heterosexual political activists give to the rest of us, right? But like in these movements, and I really wanted to really to really press on this because I really feel really strongly, and I've seen it happen a lot as cisgender like people in movements, that we really do objectify people, and it's not okay to be doing this, and so the only time when we're trans like people are relevant is when they bring the numbers at a march, and we've already as cisgender people have planned everything. We know how it's gonna go. We know how everything's gonna. Just bring in the trans people so that they can be at the march, and the police can shoot at them. You know, and I think I feel really strongly about this. That you know, white supremacy objectifies us, colonialism objectifies us as bodies, and I think that as Black people who are you know are committed to the radical change for Black people globally, I think that the objectification of people in our communities, we need to really look at it. I'm talking too much.
Thank you, Wanelisa. That's a really great point there about visibility and how sometimes visibility is not done in a meaningful way, but simply just for optics alone. And it's very painful to be so heavily invested in a community in which you are not truly included. At this point, I want to include Epiphany Jack. Epiphany, yeah. I want to include Epiphany Jack. Epiphany is here from the UE Pride. She is the events manager. She has something that she would like to contribute to this topic. Epiphany is also a committee member for the upcoming nonprofit organization Unveil that will launch soon. So Epiphany, hi.
Hi everyone, good night. First of all, let me thank you all for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion, because from all that you all have said, it is clear that things need to start happening, plain and simple. Stemming from the last thing you all were seeing, which is surrounding the sexual assaults that both Sharon and Wanelisa, I hope I pronounced your name right, said. One thing that I always, even earlier on this week actually, discussed with a close friend is that women on a whole, let's be honest, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room know at least 1, 2, or 3 women, even if it's not in your close circle, that you have heard of that has been sexually assaulted in one way or another. And for a queer woman as well, I personally have often heard men say, well, I'll turn you straight. I don't know where that comes from or where it comes from, but it's ugly, it's stupid, and it's very small-minded, because that's impossible. That it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. And I, for one, think that people are not aware of the fact, and if they are, they brush it off because they either don't care or they don't see it as irrelevant. And as a young person, young meaning not 20 yet, it is strange that for me, it's an everyday life for someone so young. Because I don't know if it was this year or some years back, but I know it recirculated that there was a post on Instagram where they were comparing Black/colored women to Caucasian people, and it was children. And they were saying that we are sexualized from a very young age. And statistics also show that the number of colored women, I'm just using colored, women who are sexually assaulted or abused in any form is higher than a Caucasian or someone of another race, simply because I don't know if they feel that because we all have this Superman/Superwoman gene that it wouldn't affect us, we'll be fine, but that's not true. It lingers, it lasts, and it affects everything you do. It affects the possibility of you even having a family, because you're going to be very abrasive to anyone who comes close to you. And it's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. Honest to God, it's honestly scary. And the fact that it's not addressed and it's not taken seriously is beyond me. And I know for a fact that I have seen for myself. I know that he identifies as him now. I don't know what was the identification when he went around as a woman, but Saucy Pow, I'm pretty sure we all know about this individual. As for when I was young, I always played mass with my school, and I would see him as a damler, and I was so fascinated. I didn't even care that, I didn't even know it was a man, to be honest. And I was just fascinated that this person could come out here and show his talents. And then all of a sudden he was beaten and forced to confine to the norm. And all of a sudden he's back to a man, never seen in carnival again, dressed as a Dame Lorraine. And a Dame Lorraine is such a powerful character, a historical character for Trinidad and Tobago, and he was forced to give up something so powerful because he wasn't normal. Why? And if to say, sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish your sentence.
Oh, I was saying, if to say now he was to fully transition, if he was to fully transition, because I know that trans women go through it too. The minute someone finds out that they were not born at the gender that they present now, it's an uproar. And then the ignorant fools who think that it's up to them to turn you back. What is this thing about turning you back? And the awareness is something that I think we need to bring to light. People need to not just only be aware that these crimes are being committed, but that they are also being shoved under the rug, under the beds. They're just being brushed off like it's not a big thing. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are doing it to, what your intention is behind it. It is still illegal. It is still a crime. And just because we are minority, the people who are committing these crimes, some people view them as heroes. Oh yes, you all are correcting you wrong. They're not a part of God. They are abominations to the earth. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if it was your son, your daughter, your loved one who these things were happening to, you would want blood. And in Trinidad, where we could, in less than a few hours ago, burn down an entire street and fight man to man against police officers, I'm pretty sure if somebody was to rape someone's child or force them to do something they didn't want to do, somebody's father, especially because my father is a madman, would go and burn down a mountainside for their child.
Thank you, Epiphany. That's a lot. One of the things that struck me in what you said just now was the points about the carnival masquerade. And that's always quite an ironic thing to observe in terms of that in the early movements of carnival in the late 18th century, early 19th century. All of the female masquerades were played by men, and yet in Trinidad and Tobago's carnival, the representation of queer culture remains even now to be so minimal. So on that point, I want us to go now to Zelika to make her contribution on the same topic. So Zelika, could you talk to us about some of the negative aspects of activism and public life that you may have experienced and would like to talk about right now?
Sure. Dame Lorraine, but just think Dame Lorraine is traditionally a male carnival character. Dame Lorraine, Pissing Lit, traditionally, and it's still played by a lot of communities, yeah. With regards to the negative impact from the community, you can leave it open, mommy. You can leave the door open. Yeah. With regard to the negative impact from being an activist, I would say mostly for me, it comes from like a class-related differences within the LGBT feminist community, activist community. That is like I would say that for me personally, particularly you see like, I mean, we all know the history of the LGBT movement, you know, like with gay men picking up a lot of space, etc., etc., etc. So I would say that the public is like always like a hard thing to like get to understand, but my experience with the public hasn't been like haven't been like even close to nearly a negative one. But it's just in terms of the politics within the communities, people not feeling heard, people not feeling listened to, being an activist without any formal training, being an activist without any formal pay or salaries, like these kind of things, like it keep adding. And then like, you know, like the last straw does break the camel back sometimes. And I think like the community is particularly hard on each other. But my thing for that is, if I see a white man and a black woman arguing, I'm going to automatically take the black woman's side. You understand? If I see a cisgender person and a transgender person arguing, I'm automatically going to take the transgender side.
Yeah.
So my thing with that is the same solution I will put for the community. If it is you is a middle class gay man and a black woman saying, hey, all in that, including us, your job is to listen to that. Because you always listen to the more marginalized group. You understand what I'm saying? So, but the community needs to learn to be a little bit more open to differences. And I had my fair share of people just watching me and judging me for no reason. You understand? Because I will rock a certain way and flex a certain way. A man go feel like, if you know, you could come at me now, boy. But I had my fair share of people, you know, thinking it's at aims because of how you might talk or whatever. But the same empathy where you want the public to have for you and for your community, the same empathy you have to have for yourself and for your community. Because at the end of the day, 80% of activists don't get paid.
Yeah.
You understand? If you, anything you have to know when to take a break too. If it is, you know, you going 50 hours a week every week, and you get every little thing stressing you out, you have to know when to take a break. Because there's more help. I learned that. There's more help rested than trying to do a million things and you ain't helping nobody. You understand? But just always trying to listen to people open-mindedly, objectively. Yeah, that is why I go say my basic challenge. It come from within the community, and that is a bit sad right now. And it comes from not knowing how to the intersection between being a queer person and being involved heavily in the activist middle class space and being from a poor ghetto community and learning how to connect the two, how to pick and choose my battles and my fights. That is one of the challenging things I would say too for me.
Thank you. This, I have to say, is a really productive conversation. These points that are being raised here, I'm glad it's being recorded because I already foresee that once the session is finished, we have to go through all of the contributions. We have to go through all of the contributions and just recollect all of these very important points. So now that we have all weighed in on negative aspects of activism and public life, I want to focus on one in particular. Over the weekend, I spoke with our fellow activist, Jillian Goddard, about one aspect of queer culture that has been weaponized time and time and time again against activists, and that is cancel culture that was formerly called call-out culture, whereby if a person who is often I should say rather, who is considered a prominent person within the community, if they are perceived as having an infraction of any kind, that person is basically shamed online by the community. Could you tell us, because I know with all of your years of experience in activism, Sharon, that you must have seen this happen time and time and time again. And whereas the rule of law often donates that a person is innocent until proven guilty, in cancel culture or call-out culture, the person is guilty until they are proven innocent, and often there is no opportunity to prove the innocence. Could you tell us about your thoughts about cancel culture or call-out culture, and ways in which we could perhaps chart a better way in dealing with problems we perceive in the community?
Ooh, yes. And by the way, I love me some Jillian. That Jillian doesn't belong to our side. Anyway, Jillian, I'm just kidding. No, Jillian is my good partner. Shaming. We real good at shaming. And you know, I love to use my little sayings. Hurt people, hurt people. Simple. Hurt people, hurt people. Yeah. And when we feel powerless, or when we feel we're not being heard, we have a way. And as women, we could do it real good. Women have a real technique. Yes, Brandy, you could laugh. Because when we become vicious, you know? And over the years, because I've sat initially around the caucus, not our caucus, the Kaiso caucus, before we were even Kaiso. And people talk about women going at it, men go at it. And I mean, with such a venom. And it is when they feel that their voices aren't being heard. And then trying to diffuse that, to get to the root of it, which is usually pain. It is usually, you did something that hurt me. And even in terms of the recent phenomenon, which we know, when you try to identify, there was a hurt that was committed 2 years ago or whatever, to identify what that hurt is. And it's so difficult because sometimes you don't even remember what the hurt was. All you know, you were hurt and you did not feel that your hurt was acknowledged. And part of your gaining power is to do this public shaming. Unfortunately, I am not a fan of fucking public shaming. You know, I don't even like when, as I always said, and I said it, we have enough people looking at us externally, wanting us to fail. There have enough people external to us who want us to fail. We don't need to air our dirty laundry. As Wanelisa said, part of this work, let us be quite clear, part of the work is trauma. There is no way you could go into this work in the positions that we are in, taking the risk, as Zelika nicely said, we're not getting paid for this shit. I've never gotten paid for activism. I've always, activism has been my passion, never my paying job, you know? And part of that is hurt. You will have people, as you say, you think you're doing good and tell you they want to fuck you and how they want to fuck you to make you straight. And they will say it online, you know, you have your family talking about shaming them because you're doing this kind of work. We come with the trauma. And for me, it is always, and I will tell you, I have a friend, Eva Rampasad. She works with family planning, the Family Planning Association. And Eva called me and she said, you know what y'all need is some serious mediation. Yes. And the mediation has to come from an external party because there are too many hurt feelings. But I will say this too, at the core of what in all years, I'm telling you, I get hurt and hurt. For me, what the core always was what am I here to do? And what am I here to do? I real privilege. Let us be quite clear, you hit in my little feelings, but I have real privilege. I am here to make this community a place where everybody feels safe. And if I have to take a little bit of hurt feelings, that's okay. But then I have a real hard sheller. I grew up in an abusive home. So I'm real strong. However, and I think at this juncture where we are now, I don't agree with public shaming, I'm sorry, but I understand where that comes from.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, serious mediation is needed. And a willingness of all the parties to come to the table. There has to be a willingness of all parties to come to the table.
I agree with you, Sharon, because one of the things I have observed with these draggings, that the term, I'm sure Epiphany knows it because that's not my generation necessarily. But these draggings often don't give the accused time to reflect. And sometimes that is what's needed, just a period of reflection. So yes, I agree fully with mediation being a progressive step forward in terms of our considerations and how we deal with infractions from members in the community instead of resorting to this public shaming. So I'm going to shift the question now and take it to Brandy. Brandy, could you speak to the same topic in terms of what you think about cancel culture, previously called fallout culture, and ways in which we could address the negative aspects of this and perhaps make suggestions about more productive ways to move forward?
Okay, firstly, I must say I always to be the one to collaborate, but in a society, in what I am seeing of lately, I am seeing a kind of hierarchy, supremacy, a kind of persons not wanting other young persons with other visions and other views and better collaboration and more things happening. I think the older heads need to reach the younger generation and reach other persons, and we need to start asking the older generations or the older activists to please support what the voices are saying, because it's not about our personalities, it's about communities. And there's a lot of disconnection where we see a lot of our leaders and activists are supporting personalities and not supporting communities and the work that the communities is asking for and what is necessary. And I have come a long way. I didn't come here yesterday. I am here 22 years, and my thing is to collaborate, and I am going to make sure that my community gets the best, because as I said before, I come here as one, but I represent many, and we need to get what we deserve, because trans women have been always at the bottom of the barrel for too long, because the LBGT, they leave the T for last, and I am asking if we could just switch around the T, put the T in front of the L and the B and the G. Let me just switch it around for a little while to give trans women a little supremacy. Trans women, we are visible. We are the one that fighting. In India, is trans women fighting for the LGBTI rights and movement. Marsha P. Jones has been fighting for Stonewall. These are the people that created things, and these are not going to be, you don't get the recognition. You're always in the bottom fighting with HIV in the 90s. The money didn't come down to trans women. Every trans woman I know who were infected in HIV died before 2003 when medication came to Trinidad. And then after that, they were still, trans women were still infected with HIV, and most of them had to run to first world countries because still there was no support and there was nothing for trans women. Let us just give trans women, put the T in front of the LG and the P, and let me see how this could work and what could happen. And I want to thank Wanelisa for that statement just now there. In terms of support for persons, we are not here as tokens. We come, we are here for numbers. We're looking for support. We're looking for collaboration. We're looking to get things done. And stop feeling we are tokens.
Yeah.
Because we are equal players in this game and we're fighting for equality. This is what it is all about. And you see, I'm going to call out because you know why? My 22 years, I have no shame. I've lost all my shame. I'm going to call them out. Okay? But we ain't talking that tonight. But we fighting.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm going to take the question now over to Zelika. So Zelika, could you address for us cancel culture, formerly called call-out culture, and tell us about what you think about it in terms of its negative aspects, and Brandy just mentioned some positive aspects as well. Well, yes, and how we can utilize this or make it more productive moving forward.
I both for and against.
Right.
And again, I'm like speaking not just from a queer perspective, but from a Black female perspective. It have something called common sense. And you could know when it is somebody make an honest mistake. Sometimes you might know, but you could know. You understand what I mean? And if you're telling somebody something 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and they're still not catering to your needs or your requests or trying to compromise or anything, then you're wasting time you're wasting time. So you could do either 2 things. You could call them out or you could create your own spaces and organize your own stuff, because it ain't making no sense trying to plead to deaf ears. And that is one. I agree with calling out culture with regards to Black people, Black women, queer people. Within smaller communities where they can have like conversations and discussions. If the person who is supposed to apparently be the person who is being called out or whatever, willing to address or whatever, get them you play. But in terms of like the general stuff, like call them out. But then you also have to think about ways that you could use certain statements and stuff to the benefit of the community. So like, for example, with regard to like a government statement or something, you might want to call it out 1 time because you might be in a position to ask for something or to request something, you know, or to give them a chance to correct it. Whereas we're calling out might harm the community, you know, they might go on defense. I know, like, I'm talking about Trinidad and Caribbean politics, specifically Trinidad politicians just like to go on defense in that kind of way. So in like that kind of sense, you could think about how, what direction will better benefit the community while not selling out the community at the same time. So you're still making it clear that, okay, this statement or this act or whatever is like not in line with, you know, like Black people or queer people or any other minority group, but you're making your demands at the same time and you're using it to your advantage. Because sometimes we gotta like sit down and think too, and not just jump on something and, you know, make noise. Sometimes you gotta sit down and be strategic. So that is my take on it. Both works, but you always have to be strategic in terms of how and what is the situation. But with regards to disrespect, call them the fuck out.
I agree with you. Strategic and compassionate. And you are right that sometimes people make honest mistakes, you know, as we continue to exist in, you know, flawed humanity. We are likely to do and say things that we regret and may immediately regret in some cases. And as we said earlier, might just require some reflection and some conversation with people who may have different ideas from ours in order to get over. So before we move on from the topic of cancel culture and the negativity, positivity, and perhaps way forward, let's ask the same question of Wanelisa. And once we are done with this topic, we'll move into a question answer session between the panelists and the viewers. So Wanelisa, could you talk to us about cancel culture? What do you think about
it? So this is a very difficult one for me because this is where I need to be accountable to the community, because I was one of the the cancel and the calling out queens, as so to speak, in my country. And you know, when I look back, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, I definitely think that I would do a couple of things very differently. And I think that, you know, I made a lot of mistakes. You know, and I think a lot of that I was reacting from a place of trauma. And so it's very difficult when you've like been very public, publicly been doing something, to then go publicly and say, you know what, actually, I was not okay. Like, that was not okay. I was not okay. And that came from a place of deep trauma, etc., etc., etc. And so for me, I mean, it's twofold, right? Because everything is always very complex. For me, I noticed that in my community, we are raised in Black families that hide like sexual predators quite a lot. And so we know the people in our families who are problematic and who, you know, victimize little Black girls who are orphans, little Black girls who are poor, little Black girls who are this, who are that, who are this. You know what I mean? Like, we know that we come from, at least in my context, Black communities that really, really hide sexual predators. And so my experience has been that when I'm in movement, the same that is manifested, in the sense that I was fighting in South Africa for free education along with other Black women, and you had, you know, sexual predators in the movement who were, you know, victimizing Black women in the movement. And some of them were very strategic because they would not necessarily victimize Black women who are vocal, who spoke good English, but they would it would be a class issue where they knew that there's certain people who didn't have a particular kind of voice, and so they could easily victimize those people in the movement, and those people would either feel that they wouldn't be listened to because of their class, or that people wouldn't believe them or take them seriously, or they wouldn't stop the movement because for those people, right? And so it became like this very strategic gender and class thing that was playing out in the movement. And one of the things that we found was that these people were, you know, kind of insulated and protected because they held so much power. And so it was very important for us to kind of like to just say, hey, you know, we have a real problem of like sexual violence. And when we talk about sexual violence, Black men in the movement are saying, well, look at the stuff that you're coming to the meetings wearing. And so I'm always like, well, if a person is, and even in South Africa, we do have a lot of people in the queer community who are really, really harmful, but because they have a lot of power, they're associated with donors, etc., they're not readily called out because they wield so much power. And so what do we do in those instances where we have people who are, you know, insulated and protected in the movement, but cause a whole lot of harm? In the same token, I will be honest to say that when I have been calling out people, I have been completely triggered, and I have been also replaying the many times when I was victimized and sexually like assaulted and abused, and no one was there for me. And so I was reliving my own childhood traumas, and that became an extension of my trauma. And so I recognize that that is not necessarily a healthy place in which for us to hold each other accountable in movements, because it's very little that someone can say to you when your nervous system is activated in that way and when you're triggered. And I will also say for myself that, you know, and this is a less sexy answer, but for myself, cultivating personal compassion for myself was very important, because I can't extend compassion for another person. I can't call out another or call in another person if I don't have compassion for my own self. And what I found when I did my own healing work, when I've completely cut away, is that the ways in which I was calling out people and dragging people is the same voice that sits in my head and completely like traumatizes and like really, you know, it's my own internal dialogue from my own personal trauma that becomes externalized, and I do that because now that I've cultivated a level of self-compassion and self-understanding, there's no way that I would be able to do that to another person on social media, because I know that right now, all of us, we operate from a place of like of hurt, and we sometimes we become activists most of the time because we have experienced an injustice, or we are passionate about people not experiencing injustice. And so sometimes anyway, I don't want to be preachy, but I do think that it sounds very abstract, but I think as a person who has done my own personal work around my own personal trauma, I have found that cultivating and identifying that super critical, destructive voice in my own head, that behavior was just an extension of my own internal dialogue and the way I treat my own self and talk to my own self, and denigrate my own self. And now that I'm in a better space psychologically, there's no way I would be able to do that behavior again. And so I think that's where, again, the work of like doing your own personal trauma and understanding your own personal trauma and working really, really, because you can't show up in the world if you are completely exhausted and broken and traumatized. There's little that you can, there's little that you can offer, because we always operate from a place of lacking and burnout, etc., etc. But when we operate from a place of fullness, that's when someone can say something that's like completely fucked up, and you just say, this is an extension of how they view themselves, right? Like most of the time, like homophobic, like straight people who kill like black gay men and trans women are like completely in denial about the fact that they're very sexually fluid, and they are completely stuck in a normative world of hatred. But it's that recognition that they recognize a humanity, and that scares them, because that means that they need to move from the place of like rigid coloniality and like heterosexuality. And so when someone says something like fucked up and homophobic to me, I'm always like, there's something that triggered that response. And that's something most of the time is when someone is recognizing themselves. And so what they want to kill in themselves, most of the time they physically are unfortunately killing people in the process, because they hope that by killing this person, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to be killing that fluidity within myself. And so, and this is the thing, I'm like, the trauma work, your own personal trauma work, the healing, you show up so much fuller in movement, so much more compassionate, and you're able to call in people, you're able to have these conversations, these difficult conversations, because you understand yourself a little bit better.
Yes. I love these points that you're making, Wanelisa. And the first point you raised related so strongly to Brandy's way in on the same topic, in terms of the necessity of having call-out culture or cancel culture, because there are people who are so powerful within our communities that they are almost insulated, and the only thing that could really bring them into account for their injustices would be to shame them in these ways. But at the same time, to go back to what Sharon was saying about hurt people tending to hurt people as well, we also, coming back to you now, Wanelisa, have to do the necessary work on ourselves in terms of processing our own trauma, so we are very clear about exactly why we are calling out a person, and also in that clarity to exercise compassion as well. So that brings us to the end of the discussion on cancel culture, and we will go now into our question answer session. What I will do is I will read the question and the name of our participants, viewer, and any one of the panelists who feels they would like to respond can just jump in, okay? So the first question comes from August. August asks, how can we forge a tighter community with other women's groups and other initiatives? Any one of our panelists would like to respond to August?
August, and one of the things I want to say is, while we talk about all the work that still needs to happen, we always need to acknowledge the work that has happened. I always say with the Women's Caucus, they had a whole, women's movement that took place before. What we did as a caucus was we injected ourselves into things. So Trinidad has the Scotiabank Breast Cancer Walk. We decided as a group, and we wore t-shirts designed by Tracy Shepard, our Women's Caucus t-shirts, and we would participate annually in those events. One year, I will tell you, they told us that the group things were sold out because we were trying to register so late. We formed our own breast cancer walk, and we had our own labels. Oh yes, we did. We set up right there by Napa for people when they finished, they got goodie bags. Down to the people who were finishing the Scotiabank walk was getting goodie bags from us. So that was one of the ways we got involved with philanthropy on a wider level. Also, the powerful ladies of Trinidad and Tobago, well, I wouldn't, my personal viewpoint about that. But anyway, they had a sports day. And I got them to invite the Women's Caucus because I don't think they quite realized that we were a lesbian group to participate in their sports day. And we went and we decorated our booth very gay with rainbows, and we won the best decorated because, you know, anytime same gender loving women doing anything, we have to go, if you think gay men do it, over the top. We do it over the top as well. So
over the top.
Over the top. So we won the best designed booth, which was all about pride and rainbow. We won the curry crab best dish. Crystal, Eva, and Nicole won enough races, and we got very ever present. So I mean, part of it is just being bold and including yourself and asking for invitations and putting on, Wanelisa, you put on your proper English voice, and they just think, oh, it's a group of women, until we show up and then they realize, oh, it's a group of those kinds of women. And then we proceed to win stuff. But it really is active engagement. But I will tell you what is core though, is that you have to cement your own group first. So we were clear about our mandate. We had done our own internal networking and that sort of thing. And then, you know, you begin to engage externally. I hope that answers the question.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. I think that's really a great contribution on forging tighter communities. We have to say, unfortunately, everybody, we have to say goodbye to Wanelisa right now. It's 5 a.m. where she is. So while we can all go up and have dinner and think, Wanelisa is probably going directly to bed. So let's all just give her a round of applause. Thank you, Wanelisa, for joining us, and thanks for all of your most excellent contributions.
Thank you, Wanelisa. It's a pleasure meeting you, and I hope we get to meet again.
Yes, thank you, everyone. So much Black love from South Africa. Thank you for the work you're doing for the queer community and the Black community in TNT. Yes, and trans visibility. Yay! Thank you so much. I really enjoyed just sharing with you. This is one of the few platforms that I've actually been a part of in 2 years, and so much love. I'm going to visit very soon, so I hope to see everyone. And yeah, thank you.
And if you're ever in Washington, D.C., let me know.
Absolutely, Sharon. Bye.
Bye, Lisa. Lovely meeting you.
Sure.
Bye.
It's so great to have these connections with people across the globe. I mean, our similarities, our differences. At this time, I am going to ask one of our panelists to address a question from Nikki. Nikki asks, very simply, but so important, how do you learn to accept yourself?
Brandy, that's for you.
Thanks, Sharon. The question from Nikki, how do you learn to accept yourself?
Self-acceptance. I think for me, I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for respect, because I had already accepted me and the journey that I had to walk, because transitioning is not something that came out. I just wake up one morning and just say, you know what? Mara and Brandy now go in and live. It was not like that. I had my years of dealing with this inside of me. It was a process that was growing and growing, and for me to just say, this is the time. I never knew when the time was going to be that I was no longer interested in male clothing. I am interested in female clothing. It's something that the mind is telling you when the body is ready for this. Because doing this process, it wasn't, I knew who I was from the age of 5. I knew who I was, and I had to fit in and you know, hide to live. And I really hide. I hide for long. I thank God I only had one brother, and I used to make it go all about just run away so that I could be dressed up and go back and be normal, because dress up was heavy when you was younger. Because when your mother dressed that thing so big and heavy, you're getting tired really quick. So I used to dress up really, because my mother wasn't, she shop, she had a restaurant. So she not coming upstairs to look for nobody. And my brother run away from since morning. So by the time I tired, he come back. So I had my days of, you know, dealing with who I want to be and testing the waters from time to time to see this is, you know, this is where I want to go. And I had already accepted what it was, but what I was looking for, and I'm still addressing, even it's 22 years, is respect. And we have to meet people on the fundamental human rights. We can't meet them by what we feel this is human rights. We have to meet people. People must meet at that fundamental level. And things will be easier. Things would be smoother. And you have to accept who you are, and then you would be start to be looking for respect for who you are. And that's how I get by, and I think it's my thing I do from the time I get up in the morning. I thank God, thank you, Jesus. I know I study my mother and my brother, and this house, and what I'm going to do for the day, and how I'm going to navigate, and how I'm going to go forward on my plans for the day and sit down here. And I get my work done, because I start with respecting who I am and what I have to do and my commitment. That is how it starts. It's going to get by.
I have one thing to add, if I can. Nikki, I want to say, who you are is okay. Let no one ever tell you who you are is not okay. Being gay, bisexual, transgender, is normal. That's the first thing you have to program in your own head. Ignore the other voices. Who you are is normal, just as you are. No explanation needed.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing I heard growing up that continues to be instructed to me is you are always in the process of becoming. So yes, there are things about yourself that you've figured out, but there's still yet more things and more things and more things to figure out. And we're just going to continue growing, continue developing until we die. So to also, in addition to what Brandy said, and in addition to what Sharon said, to always leave space to know more about yourself and to be ready to accept those things as they come as well. So at this time, I'm going to ask a question that was put forward by Alana. Is Zelika still with us? Zelika, are you still here? Okay, I think Zelika has left. The question Alana asked, how to be a better ally? How can one be a better
I'm here,
ally?
Amanda.
Great. So
Sorry,
Zelika, you can please take Alana's question for us. How do you think a person interested in being a better ally can do that?
Being an ally is more about like supporting, I would say. and taking the front line when you need to. So like, for example, I'm gonna use like Black Lives Matter. Being in the middle of standing in solidarity and like for like the white people who have been like at the front lines, like and I like commending them. I ain't reached so far yet, but putting yourself at knowing that okay, the police not gonna kill them as opposed to if it was black people on the front lines. So like that kind of stuff. Going in front when you need to go in front, but stepping back when you need to, knowing when to step back when you need to step back. And you could figure out that by literally just asking whoever you're trying to be an ally to. And yeah, just ask.
I agree with you.
Can I jump in?
Of course.
Okay. Another thing you should do is assess yourself. What can you bring to the table? And allyship shows up in a number of ways. If you don't want to be on the front line, dig deep. You might have some coins. You see, I learned the verbiage, coins. You might have some coins, and that could be your contribution. If you have writing skills, PR skills, if you want to do some training, you know, ask yourself, what can I bring to the table? And then you just put it forth and say, well, you know, I'm good at this. You don't have to be you don't have to be good at jumping up and down and getting beaten and arrested. Just whatever skills you have to bring to the table. I'm telling you, we need, right, Brandy? We need. So anything you have to give, I think will be welcome.
Yes, together with that, Sharon, I think you should be listening. Allies should be listening because allies usually come with a lot of privilege. And this is something that the voices should be a part, the trans women should be a part of the conversation. They're not supposed to be telling you what you need. We're supposed to say what we need. So allies more is about, to me, should be more into the privileges they're coming with and listen to what my needs are. And we'll get by.
Thank you so much. We have a really interesting question from Matthew. Matthew asks, what things are being put in place to bring national, global awareness to the Black community as it relates to queer equality rights? I think this is really interesting because I recently I have to go back and finish, started reading an article about the future of Pan-Africanism, which of course interested me because this was one of my areas of advocacy. And the premise of the article was that the struggle for civil rights had become so essentialist over time that it stopped recognizing anything, even within the movement, that wasn't identified as just Black. So there was no place for the welfare of LGBTI. There was no place for the welfare of any minority within the minority. And so, of course, it begged the question of how Pan-Africanism would morph, what it would morph into in the future. So to the panelists, I would repeat the question from Matthew. What things are being put in place to bring national global awareness to the Black community as it relates to queer equality rights?
Lord, why Wanelisa left, boy? This sounds like it is a Wanelisa kind of question.
I know, I know.
I know, Zalika, ask her to repeat that time, please. One more time, repeat it one more time.
Yes, Zalika.
Can I also ask?
With thanks. Go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to ask, I see some other people on this group who are not part of the panel, who might also be able to input in this question. I think they should as well, but go ahead, repeat the question. If anybody
Of course, at this juncture, to all viewers, if you think you would like to weigh in response to any of these questions, please feel free. Just turn on your video so we could see you, and turn on your mic. Don't be Amanda, so we can hear you as well. The question, with thanks to Matthew, what things are being put in place to bring national global awareness to the Black community as it relates to queer equality rights?
I will tackle it. I would tackle the question from an organizational perspective, through I Am One and its work. I mentioned earlier how I Am One is a member of the Commonwealth Equality Network that works across countries across the Commonwealth. So like that is in one aspect in terms of connecting with Black activists from various countries and doing like joint work as well. Some of our own local organizing on the global level with Black queerness relates to our International King Conference, which specifically is not just is a conference for like trans men and masculine and LGBTQ women, but for the 2 years we run it. It was specifically for Black and brown trans men and masculine presenting women, because we saw the race as an important factor in it in terms of inclusion. Trans men and like masculine presenting women and trans men, especially those who haven't undergone any kind of physical surgery, is the people who you would see and identify as queer automatically, you know, just based on their gender expression and presentation. So in that sense, and often like they are often kind of neglected in the community in the sense of they have so much in common, but the trans men fit under transgender and masculine presenting queer women fits under being lesbian. But they have like so much in common and then also like so much differences in terms of like identities and whatnot. But I kind of like straying from the question, I'm sorry, but in terms of like global Pan-Africanism, like I wanted to tackle the question because I am into that. And I feel like the way that we could do that is really connecting, like what I was touching on earlier in terms of other communities, other marginalized communities of where Black people exist and live, and connecting and doing projects, like simple projects. If it involves agriculture, it doesn't, queer people, the LGBT community step out of just doing LGBT activism.
Yeah.
Like projects that we can do other than a gender-based violence workshop. I mean, that these workshops and stuff is important, but we could do like agriculture. We could do different things. Right now, I Am One is incorporated is developing and almost to the launch of a startup business called Better Bites, which is a healthy snacks company, to generate funds to take care of the organization and in the future other LGBT organizations in Trinidad and probably in the Caribbean, based on how successful the business is, fingers crossed. So this is how we need to be thinking, because the quicker we are sustainable and we can take care of itself and not dependent on donor funding and these kind of stuff, we will be able to dictate our own pace, dictate what projects we're funding, because these owners just come with, okay, we don't want to do this, we want to do that. Like recently, I was trying to get some funding for the COVID-19 stuff with Brandy, and I'm just like, oh, well, focus on South. And they want to tell you like what to do and not understanding the needs of your community. So generating your own income, and the best way of doing that is working with other communities outside of the LGBT communities, because the LGBT people are not just queer people. We's lawyers, we's doctors, we's farmers, we's dentists, you know, we sex workers, we hustlers, we connect every way. And the community could take care of itself, and that was always our vision. Like when we were doing Pride Arts Festival and stuff, we started with $250 TT, right? And the festival cost over 25,000. Within a few months, we was able to generate that, but through the work of members of the community itself, through our community, we generated that. Through connecting with other people, we had people from Pfizer, people from Point, you know, like making these connections, geographical communities. Huh? All right, I will lock up. Okay, moms. Yeah. Connecting on a geographical level and also on different levels. It's just connecting across communities because we're too close connected. We have to reach out and make these connections.
Thank you, Zalika. Great point there about being self-sustaining as an organization.
I just want to add.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what Zalika was saying is, for me at the Trans, what we do, we push intersectionalities at all levels as a Black Caribbean trans woman, because we have to speak the language, Caribbean, Black, and trans. You know, experiences in all our species is considered when we doing work with the Trans Coalition and want to represent in any space. We have to always talk about that trans Caribbean woman, because the dynamics and the language is totally different from other trans women or in different spaces. Like the Spanish speaking people is totally different to the North American. So we have to understand what language we are speaking and language in our intersectionalities and bring it together, present it so that it would be understood on all levels.
Thank you. I am going to move now to Rama. Rama asks, have feminist organizations in Trinidad and Tobago done enough to advocate for lesbian and trans women's rights? I think that's a really good question. I think that's a really good question.
What is your take on that? Let me hear what Amanda has to say as a feminist in Trinidad.
I feel completely exposed. Thank you, Rama. Of course, this goes back to exactly what Brandy and Sharon were just talking about in terms of intersectionality within larger communities, because the point Sharon made about going to an academic space and realizing in that space that when they spoke about women's rights there, they did not necessarily include sexualities that were not considered mainstream. And notice that I put that in quotation marks. I understand that even within feminist organizations, and I've been in leadership positions in different organizations over the years, within feminist organizations, women's rights organizations, that mistake is made as well. And even when the question of sexuality is addressed, certain sexualities are privileged above others. So lesbians may have more access to resources or more space to speak or more visibility than trans women or than bisexual women. So that's why this question makes me feel completely exposed, because then it of course makes me reflect on the years and the ways in which I may not have done enough in terms of my advocacy for that. And of course, I am challenged to take it into great consideration forward. So I would say no, Rama, I don't think enough has been done. And I think part of the reason why not enough has been done is exactly because of privilege. You know, we often don't take things into consideration that don't affect us directly, and that's incorrect, gross, disgusting on many levels, and we really should be doing better. So even though I have identified as queer from the start of my public work in advocacy, I could see how not always have I considered the needs of vulnerable persons within the queer community, such as the I in LGBTI, intersex. How often do we have conversations about intersex persons in the community? Persons with disabilities, persons with particular mental health concerns. So you are absolutely right in terms of the framing of this question. My answer is I don't think we've done enough. We really should be doing better as a community. Anybody else explain?
And I think it's important also, because it's almost like a crab in the barrel. We have to understand. And I would say I could understand, but that doesn't say it is right.
Yeah.
And I think as lesbians or same gender loving, or I'll say same gender loving because that's what I am, lesbian. It is important for us to be able to also articulate what our needs are, and to push, and to say you can't, talk about feminism, or feminism is not all inclusive if I'm not included. And I guess that's where the calling out comes in, right? Not shaming, but calling out. But it's also building that voice. Because again, when you're part of an invisible population, right? Because I'm sure in the feminist movement, you'll have lesbians, but it is that it is the worst thing that you could be is gay, to get over that notion that the worst thing you could be is gay. And so I could talk about feminism and women's rights, but I can't talk about my needs as a lesbian, or about what I need reflected in feminism in the Caribbean from my perspective. It's almost like, and it's that juggle of how do you define yourself? What do you define yourself first as? Is it Black? Is it same gender loving? Is it, which one takes precedence? But yeah, it definitely needs more concerted, overt recognition within the movement.
Yeah, and constant revision. We have to keep assessing ourselves. So the next question, thank you so much, Sharon. The next question comes from Ash, and luckily enough, we have a response from Zalika, which she left in the comment section already. Ash asked, what are your thoughts on the intersectionality of queer activism and disability? Because I've seen in spaces where disability is sometimes an afterthought, and in an already marginalized group, how do we ensure that persons aren't left out? And Zalika responds, great question, Ash. You're right, queer people with disabilities are treated as an afterthought. They need to be included in these and other discussions in terms of helping to plan events, sitting on communities, etc., so that they can foster, so that these things can foster inclusion. Some of the ways that we can include them includes reserving spots on boards, committees, events, etc., for queer people with disabilities. Thank you for the response, Zalika. And Ash, that is really a question that we're not asked enough, unfortunately, and we really should. Not just for the sake of tokenism, but obviously if this is work that we are doing for the community with regards to the question of constantly asking, who is this work for, who is this work for, who is this work for? I remember the first time the Women's March was planned in response to a call to action made by the Life in Leggings Committee in Barbados. The regional solidarity rally was planned, and out of that came this Women's March. And on the very day of that march, it was a Saturday, someone left in that group chat the question, what provisions are being made for people with disabilities. And I confess, it was only at that moment that I thought about it. And all the time we have these opportunities to just observe ourselves. You know, you're so caught up in your own life, you're so caught up in your own world, you're so caught up in your own privilege that you treat these very important aspects of the full experience, the full community experience, you treat these things as an afterthought, when in fact they should always be at the core of all our planning and all our conversations. Would anyone else like to weigh in?
Amanda, what I would say too is don't forget, all of this is evolving and a lot of learning as well.
Yes.
Because I tell people, when I came home in 2003, we were talking about LGBT.
Yeah.
It was LGBT, and then came the Q, and then became the I, you know, because it is as we begin to drill down, because it's not clear. The labels, the boxes do not define everybody. So even within that context of lesbian, you know, and then again, as in wider society, there are always minority subgroups, and how do we embrace? I think this is where collaboration is critical and important. We aren't experts on people with disabilities, but they have organizations in Trinidad and Tobago that that's their core competency. You know, how do we collaborate with them so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? How do we embrace, because then we could combine resources. So, okay, we're putting on a march. Let us talk to the equivalent organization in Trinidad and say, what needs to happen, you know? And I think that's where the collaboration, I remember Nadine Lewis-Agard always has talked about this for like eons, about the importance of collaborating and with other groups, because that's how we will actually build our strengths. Because I'm sure I don't know if they call it the Blind Welfare Association. Remember they had a Blind Welfare Association? Yes. And I am sure that within their membership, there are people of varying sexual orientations. And how do, you know, they may need our wisdom as they try to fully address all of their constituents, you know? Yes. So yeah, collaboration.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really like this panel. I just have to tell you right now, guys, you're doing a fantastic job. We have one question now. We have three more, but we're going now to one of our viewers who would like to remain anonymous. And just take off Facebook. Someone is trying to call me while we're on the Zoom. Anyway, someone who would like to remain anonymous asks, there are always questions about parents accepting their kids, but how do we deal with kids accepting their parents? And I suppose this question is related to sexuality and coming out. And Sharon just put her hand high in the air and waved it. Juve morning. So yes, Sharon.
I remember that women's caucus meeting, and it was very painful. Those of us who are parents, that was one of our crying sessions. You know, it was very emotive. I could tell you all my experience. I started same gender relationships when my son was about 3, and when I don't do anything halfway. You know, I live with people. And so I lived with women from that point on. And I remember my same friend Nadine had said, have you had a discussion with Jabari about your sexual? I was like, no, he must know, you know, his mother, we've only had woman and woman who I lived with and took care of him, etc. And then I remember he was about 15 years old, and I had gone on one of their morning programs, and I was outed on that program. And the guy asked me, whatever his name was, I can't remember, it was years ago. He came out and asked me, we went to discuss the domestic violence bill or whatever, and he asked me point blank. And at that moment, I had to make a decision on whether I would lie or whether I would live my authentic self. And I told him, yes, I was a lesbian. And then the whole interview turned towards me and what the child father, you say you have, you know, all of this on morning TV. And I remember making a decision that I have to have this conversation when I get home with my son, because one of the parents at his high school may have seen this and it may come up. And I was so sure, let me tell you all, I was so sure that this young man who had seen his mother with women and had been part of my sex worker stuff, Jabari would come to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender meetings and all the whole works. He was all in the mix, you know? I was sure this boy knew. So I remember he was making a sandwich and I was sweeping. And I said to him, Jabari, you know I'm a lesbian, right? That's just how I drop it. And Jabari froze in the middle of making the sandwich. You just see him freeze. Then I see him start shaking. Then I see tears start to flow. And I said, what the fuck did I just do? And he just went into his bedroom and slammed the door. And he wouldn't open the door. And I was like, oh fuck. In that moment, the fear that I had lost my son. I remember my lover came home and I told her, she knocked on the door and he opened the door for her. I don't know, Brandy, was he heard the story already? Anyway, I remember thinking that my son would never speak to me again. 3 days later, it took him 3 days, and he said to me, Mom, does that mean that I am gay? And I said, of course it doesn't. And then, it took a couple of years after, and I asked him, Jabari, what did you think all these women in my life that I lived with? He thought they were roommates. Poor thing. So he really thought it was, but it is a scary, so we had to have a whole chat session, and I think we had a psychologist come in to talk, because you think that your children know, but your children see you in a particular light.
Yeah, a non-sexual light.
A non-sexual light. And then when, on top of having to see you in a sexual light, see you in a light that society has deemed is so wrong, you know? And I will tell you, fast forward, I'm not done with the story. I remember once he called me when he moved back to the States. He was on a bus, he said, and some woman on the bus was talking about these homos and something. And my boy, who is very shy and quiet, got up and said, I don't appreciate what you are saying. And the woman said, what? He said, members of my family are gay. And he moved, you know, and that was his stance. But I mean to say, y'all, that it is critical that you don't drop it like I drop it.
Yeah. That
you really think about how you're going to share that information, and you may need to get an intervention, you know, psychologist or whatever. We have in the community, psychosocial therapists, etc., who could help with that conversation.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a deep, insightful, well told, and
we don't have any other parents. No other parents on all of this. Olia, come on. Any other parents of gay people in this group right now?
Any other parents or what? Say it, repeat the question.
Any other parents or any of the gay parents in the group right now?
Gay parents, yeah.
Who could share, or children who, or people whose parents are gay that could share that experience? I don't want to call names, you know, because I well seen a name. All right.
Don't out anybody.
Don't out
anybody.
I shut up.
We are going to move on now. We have 2 more questions.
Oh God, yes.
This one is from Sharon. Yes, our viewers are very active. This one is from Sharon. Sharon asks, how can we educate ignorant parents, especially the father figure, as a Black masculine lesbian, as well as being in Form 6? I've seen a lot of ignorant fathers physically and emotionally abusing their children who are part of LGBTQIA+ community. That is well timed. I think at this stage in our conversation, we should be addressing this, and that is the fact that young people, not just young people, but people who may not have access to resources, continue to be in very precarious positions in terms of their living arrangements and be receiving abuse from the people they live with. And for young people, this may be coming from their parents, and this person is specifically asking about the father figure, especially as they are Black masculine presented lesbian. Any member of our panel would like to take this one? Zelika, are you there? Sharon?
I know I was talking too much, that's why I got really quiet. I tell people, you never know until you actually become a parent. It's different when you're a child, right? And you want what you want and you know what you know. And then as a parent, a lot of it is fear. A lot of what we see outwardly manifests, the basis of it all is fear. I know as a parent, the fears that I have when it comes to my son being a Black man in America. I am so fucking happy he trapped in Trinidad with the closed borders. You know what I mean? Because, you know, and I tell him, boy, be humble. You know, those conversations that you see play out on videos, they tell you when they school their children and how. I have had that conversation with Jabari being a Black man in America since he's about 10. But anyway, back to the question. So sometimes it is fear, the parent fearing how society will perceive their child, what harm could come to their child. It could also be a challenge of their, because that's the other thing as we do as parents, it's be our fault. What did I do to make my daughter this, you know? What did I do? Did I do something wrong? And so I remember we had put in Friends for Life, I believe, had the parental support group that was open to providing psychosocial support to parents. Marcus, I see in the background there. You should be answering some of these questions. Marcus Kisoon. Providing psychosocial support to parents. And then if you really feel that you are in danger, if it's outright hate, then you have to figure out how to get out of that situation. Or so, because you may not be able to get out of that situation if you're in sixth form and you need to graduate and that's the roof over your head. How to stay safe until you are able to get out. Because it's great for us to say, oh God, just leave, or just do what you want, or just live your authentic life. You can't live your authentic life if that is going to kill you at this point in time. Right, Siobhan? I seen you shaking your head. So sometimes, you know, we do what we have to do until we could do better or different.
Yes.
Yeah, but I would say, you know, we have to really assess what's going on with the parent.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Sharon. And of course, to remember that every situation is different. So for some people, it may just be a matter of awareness, you know, and this is why awareness campaigns are important and visibility is important, representation in the media, etc. important. But then there are some persons who may be harboring deep homophobic hatred, homophobic feelings, which is of course a deep hatred, and that may be resulting in violence. So each case begs its own assessment. Would anybody else like to address this question? I think it's one of those that we need more people weighing in on. Marcus, would you like to Brandy?
I think we should have more non-gender conforming cultures, increase the knowledge for that, because usually masculinity always have a way of always being the way, and there is no femininity culture and there's no understanding for that. So if we have more non-gender conforming, you know, conversation and increase the culture for that, we could see where we could, it's easy to have a trans son or a trans woman as your daughter, because if you know, lessen the masculinity thing, because that is what is something that is taught. That is not, you know, it don't grow inside you. It's messaging, is, you know, blue is the boy and you have to run in the bush and go and hunt and do this and do that and pick this for kills and you have to stay home. And I don't know what he has, you know, but you know, we have to change that concept, and it can let persons be, you know, talk and bring gender involved in the conversation.
Absolutely. Anyone else before I move on to the next question?
Hi, just to add to the conversation, one thing that I would say that should be done as well is that you by yourself need to be slightly patient. And as speaking personally, you would get upset, very upset at times, especially when they try to tell you about your style of clothes. You would really get upset. You will, especially when they say, "Oh, maybe I should put on a tighter pants." No, you would get upset. You really will. So patience is something you really have to have, both for you and you have to have it for them as well, because as Brandy said, as well as Sharon and Amanda, in their minds, when fathers have girls, from the time they hold you, they already seeing 10 years down the future. All right, cool. I'm going to frighten the husband, and then I'll get to walk her down the aisle. And now that you are not just not going to have a husband, you are also more masculine. They still, it's going to take them a while to adjust. And you have to show that your patience is what will lead them to be patient with you as well. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Someone else? And we are seeing Shahan saying that sometimes they're just not going to adjust, and that is part of the reality as well. It's a tragic thing, but we know from experience, people who've been doing this work for ages and ages and ages, and of course people who have lived through it, we know that despite all of the advice that could be given in response to this question on how our parents could become more accepting, unfortunately, in some cases, parents may not accept you. And this goes back to, I really like the question on how do you accept yourself, which is incredibly more critical and which could really act as a comfort and a booster in the events that you may not receive what you are looking for from your parents, receive the acceptance that you would like from them. Someone just posted in the group chat an article that you could refer to as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that article, and I really appreciated Epiphany Jack's statement about like finding that patience to sit with the fact that your parents aren't going to be able to see you the way that you're seeing yourself just yet, because they've projected from the time you came into the world all of these ideas about who you would be and where you would go, and they want the best things for you, and so it's really hard for them to see that change as you kind of become more self-determinant. And so it's definitely good to have that patience and that self-compassion that then allows you to operate and engage with them in a more compassionate and patient way as well.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else?
Everyone, so this is Wade.
Hi, Wade.
How are you all? So in addition to being patient, you can also maybe look around those people who influence, especially males in your family. Someone who's compassionate, whom he respects, who might be a support for him if he has to eventually come around with facing the fact that you are your true self. And that's not in line with what he expects. Usually men tend to listen, they won't want to listen to their children. My father was a very egocentric, Jesus-loving man going to a Pentecostal church. When I came out, so you can imagine the rain of fire I had to go through. And I had no support in my house, so I went to hell in 2 seconds from saying I am gay. So, but hell was nice, the fire well burned. But there were members of my family who were supportive. So, they're depending on your family network, the conversation would definitely go outside of your house, and then they would start to maybe psychologically appeal to other people whom they respect and say, you could believe my child come and say this? Maybe there is one person in your family, and in my case, it was my grandmother, surprisingly, who said, that's my grandchild, and you can't make any decision for my grandchild. My grandchild is his self. So sometimes try not to come out. If you think your situation is one in which you have a masculine, male, stereotypical father who's not going to take this well enough, and you feel that you're stifling and you need to come out, find another person in your family who you respect and love, who you believe might accept this news, so that you validate yourself, that the message has gone to your DNA system. Those people who help to create you, that you are valid and that you exist. But yes, love yourself.
Thank you so much, Wade, for that contribution. At this time, we will go to the last question that is from Vilia. Vilia asks, and I would like Brandy to weigh in on this first, then we'll go to Sharon. What suggestions do you have on how we center the most marginalized in our queer trans communities in these conversations? And what can folks with privilege do? How do we tackle classism, anti-Black racism, and ageism?
I would say, I would say to put trans persons at the beginning and work our way up, because being most marginalized and most vulnerable and most visible, I think we have the most advantages and disadvantages. We should get a little more in of us being at the forefront. That is why I asked the T to be in front of the L and the G and the B, because government have a way of making sure that the rich remain rich. I mean, poor, they design things in such a way, because even with this pandemic, I see development is giving, come and follow the form, you're getting your money, that and the other. Who followed, who have NIS? The people who work 3 and 4 years in any corporation or any business. It's not, that was paid to the poor people. They didn't think about, they make sure that poor people were actually left out, because they frustrate you with 10 or 20 and you don't even have an ID card. So you can't even read the forms, as a matter of fact, and then you can't go online to access it because you don't have the mechanism, the tools to do whatever you're supposed to do. So I think putting the most marginalized and vulnerable at first and working from that way up to get a little more support, because we have already had, you know, the other way around where it was where most persons who were already supported and suppressed, most suppressed, is going to some kind of treatment and care.
Thank you, Brandy. Sharon?
Thank you, Marcus, for the trans flag that keep popping up in the background. I think one of the things that we really tried to do with the Women's Caucus was to create safe spaces. And safe spaces where that was regardless of socioeconomic. There were lessons learned. I mean, I remember when we also tried to include, we had a trans chat. They tried to include, because it was an evolution. Remember when we had to try and deal with the difficult issue of bisexuality, because bisexuals felt their voice wasn't being heard. But I think it's important to create safe spaces. We have to meet people where they are, because it's, you know, whether you had to go down, south, central, or whatever, you may have to have a sort of roving kind of setup. But let me tell you, and if you're ever in a position of privilege and you feel that you're getting up there and you're starting to get full of yourself, you must do what I do. Take yourself away and become marginalized all over again. Leave your nice privileged spot in Trinidad and Tobago and come to Black America at 52 years old and think the doors will open for you to get a job that take you 9 months to get in your secretary with your master's degree. I tell people, I have a way, I do this. My family always wonders. I put myself in situations that make me remember my own vulnerability and just how unprivileged I am. And that's your reality check. Create your own reality checks. When you feel that you're becoming the leader of the group and you're all full of your self-importance, do your own reality check. Because if you are called to serve, it is to serve, not to lead. And you are led by you are servant to those you are called to serve. So I would say, create safe spaces, make those safe spaces accessible. The issues that you discuss within those safe spaces are not issues that you generate, that come from the people that are part of your group. Yeah, and have constant needs assessments, have constant reality checks, ask for help, you know. It's work, y'all. Ain't nothing glamorous about this shit. It's work, and it's usually non-paying work. But it's some of us, those of us who can, must. That is what I will say. To whom much is given, much is expected. I think that's it in a nutshell for me. Safe spaces, accessibility, meeting people where they are.
Thank you, Sharon. And that's a great place for us to conclude. Safe spaces, accessibility, meeting people where they are. This was an incredible conversation. We have to wrap up now. So at this time, I'm going to say thanks to our brilliant panelists. Thank you, Sharon, Mottley.
Wait, let me get my flag.
Hero to many. Hero to
flag.
many.
Wait, let me get
Yes,
my flag.
get it. Get it.
Marcus was waving flag. He feels he's the only one who has flag. Look, Brandy, look, Marcus. Fuck you. Everybody else gone home. Yeah, man, you have to put in at least one fucking there.
Right. And that's another reason why I like this Zoom construct, because you could just be open, you know, things you might have shied away from in other spaces, you just let loose here, right? So thank you, Sharon, for all of your contributions this evening. And I'm so happy for the questions, because all the time we have to remember that every single day another person comes in who has no idea about who you are or what you've been doing. And even though some of the questions are things we may have confronted a million times before, it's always important to be prepared to answer time and time and time again. Sharon, thank you so much. Thanks also to Brandy Rodriguez. Brandy, any closing words?
I would say for my closing words, we have really touched on the panel, the honesty of the panel. It was really, 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 say 2 hours, but I didn't mind went on for how long, you know, because it was really nice to see what where it ended and where it was going. It was really rich, really rich. Thank you. We need to call them out.
Call them out.
Call them out. Call them out.
Tea first.
Put the tea first. That's a great slogan. That's a great slogan. Put the tea first.
Put the tea first.
Tea first.
Yes, tea first.
Thanks also to Zelika Julian. Zelika, are you still with us?
I think Zelika left.
Yes. Zelika always brings these perspectives that are so challenging, but challenging in their simplicity, challenging in just how obvious they are. Like, obviously, Black queer femme should include a class aspect as well. And just from the start of the conversation, Zelika added that dimension, and I am always appreciative of her ability to make complex arguments even further complex. So thanks to Zelika Julian. And of course, we said goodbye to Wanelisa Xaba previously, our good friend from South Africa, whom we are all going to keep in touch with because she's amazing and awesome, and we need to maintain these connections. And at this time, I will turn over to the chairman of PrideTT, Rudy Hanamji, who would give the closing remarks. Rudy?
Get up, Rudy. Get up.
Hello, I awake whole night. I listening to this bacchanal, and let me tell you all, I'm having a lot of self-reflection, and this is a fantastic opportunity for some of us, you know, to consider, as we were talking, how to engage differently and to recognize where privilege sometimes does not give you the perspective to walk in someone else's shoes. And I've always said that our doors remain open. People can come in and they can leave when they need to, but we would like to use that moment of self-reflection to continue to approach our work differently and in a way that builds community. But actually Ava Chavez is the one who has to close off tonight. So with that, I just want to say thanks to everyone, and it was a fantastic conversation, and I'll hand you all over to Eva.
Thank you, Rudy, for coming up with this session. From the What Are We Black Queer Femmes?
I must admit, I navigated my way through the programming this year, and I was so happy that Amanda and the panelists and you all just took it up and ran with it, and that's what we're about. We just provide a platform. All of our partners can attest to that. We provide a platform. By the way, you all should know that your reach tonight went into the thousands, because this live has shared.
But wait a minute now, not even wearing a bra.
Oh, am I allowed to make a joke and say maybe that's why? I don't know if that, you see.
No, darling, not with these ugly breasts. Sorry.
But no,
don't tape that. Edit that out.
I edit a thing. You all have reached across the globe. So you see me, I proud and I happy. So you all did very well. Thank you very much. But over to Eva.
Well, before we go to Eva, I thank the panelists, but I would also, it would be remiss of me to not thank the viewers, to not thank the people who came in, offered comments, put forward questions for us, and just were here to support as well. So to all our viewers, thank you so much, especially Phoenix. Thank you, Phoenix from Pride UE, for all of your contributions today. Every person who sent in a question, thank you so much. And please, if you have further questions that you would like to ask, or if there's a topic around the issue of Black queer femme that was not addressed tonight and you would like to raise it, please feel free to go to the event page and put it there, and perhaps panelists could take up the conversation in that forum.
I
Eva,
just want to
now
add
over to you.
something before we do this. Now, the Trans Coalition, we have added on some services because we have the resource for the next 6 months to collaborate with some psychosocial support and also documentation of violence. And there's also some funding for HIV for navigation. These are some of the services that we had gotten funded for the next 6 months through the shutdown of the country. So anybody need any help and support, psychosocial, be it mental health, also in case management, or to report any documentation of human rights violation, please feel free. There's a website, and we also have our page, Facebook page, and we also partnering with PrideTT so we could get the information to move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brandy. So we're turning over to Eva now. Eva.
Hi, guys. Good night again. All right. So you've thanked everybody, and I want to personally thank you. You did an amazing job of moderating tonight. I think, I mean, oh gosh, I don't think anybody could have done it better, Amanda. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
I know Siobhan wanted to say
You're
something,
welcome,
and he did not know how to interject.
No, it was a Facebook comment that they didn't. Yeah, it was addressed on Facebook. I replied on Facebook, but it was a Facebook question.
Oh. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, we intend to continue this conversation, and PrideTT intends to do more work for the community, and it's for the community, by the community, and we're going to continue to use that slogan because we're listening. I want everybody to know that we're listening, and we're going to continue this conversation. So I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. For the panelists, you all were awesome. The questions were great. It shed light on a lot of the issues that people are having. So thank you very much, everyone. Rudy, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Happy Pride!
Happy Pride! 2020, yay!
Yes, happy Pride 2020.
Well, just remember to go to the page and contribute because we need some money.
Oh, God, I had to do some sex work for that, y'all.
We have a GoFundMe account and a FundMe TNT drive as well. As you all know, we don't go to international funders and corporate Trinidad deliberately, because we believe that part of empowerment is in the community realizing that it can do this together. People can contribute in kind as well as in cash, and that goes a long way. And yeah, register for all the events, the next 3 weeks of events at PrideTT.com. And tomorrow actually is our first Queer Votes Count Town Hall with the MSJ, and throughout the rest of the month, we're hoping to have the other political parties. So tune in. And Eva, you want to tell them quickly about the motorcade?
One second, ready? Right, the motorcade. So, you all ready for some fun? That motorcade, boy, whoa. Right, so we're doing a motorcade this year because of social distancing and all the restraints that we're facing. That motorcade starts from our home. I believe it's safe to call it our home now, which is Nelson Mandela Park. And we're traveling all the way up to Arima. Coming back down, obviously we'll be picking up people on the way.
What day?
Go ahead, Sharon.
No, what day is that?
That will be on the 26th, Rudy, yes?
Yeah, 26th of July, Sunday.
Of July. Sunday, the 26th of July. And from Arima, we're going all the way down to South because we're taking Pride nationwide. We're going all the way down to South. And then we're ending in Central where we'll have our celebrations there.
Can somebody buy me a ticket? Oh no, the border's closed. All right.
We'll get an exemption.
We send in a plane for you, Sharon.
I only wish. That's okay. I know I'll be there in spirit.
Well, happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Everybody.
Go get some rest. See you all tomorrow.
Bye. Yes, I have to be on the plantation early. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.